Welcome to the Lincoln City Council meeting of the 30th of April, 2018. In accordance with LB 898, a copy of the open meetings law is posted at the back of the chamber by the northwest door. This is the first, we're beginning with the Board of Equalization meeting. And our first order of business is to elect a chair, so I'll open the floor for nominations. Carl?
I would move that Roy Christensen be our chair of this.
Second.
Moved by Carl, seconded by Cindy. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Raybold?
Not here right at the moment.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Eskridge? Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Motion carried 6-0.
The order of business for the Board of Equalization is as follows. Each year, the Lincoln City Council passes a number of improvement district ordinances. These improvement districts are generally in response to petitions submitted by property owners whose land is benefited by the proposed improvement. These districts most generally encompass such items as water, sewer, paving, and ornamental lighting. However, the council does have authority to enter into the field of sidewalk construction, storm sewer construction, graveling and grading of streets, and into the general right-of-way acquisition for street purposes. Once these projects have been completed, the cost of these services are paid for by the city from its special assessments revolving fund. It is then necessary for the city to recoup its costs from the benefited property and reimburse its revolving funds. Please call the first item.
We have one item today. It is alley repaving district number 50 in 16th to 17th streets between G and H streets.
Is there anyone here wishing to testify on this item? Please come forward.
Susie Philippi, Public Works Engineering Services. This alley is commonly referred to as the Ferguson Alley, so that might help a little more for where things are. The neighborhood had worked with the maintenance department and exhausted most of the options of repair, so in 2016 requested creating this district. They were able to quickly get the majority of signatures, which helped the project advance faster. This was a fairly complicated project. You should have most of the details listed in the summary table that was sent to you, so I won't repeat all of them. But I would like to give a special thank you to the following. Stevens and Smith's Construction. The staging on this alley between two very busy arterial streets is tough. They also had historical items that we weren't sure how they would weather the construction. This included a brick wall that was right behind the Ferguson house, the carriage house which opened into the alley. There is also redstone curb located on the alley return, which is a historical material that requires special care when removing. I'd like to thank the State Historical Society and the state for letting us use the Ferguson house for our meetings, which was invaluable to have the evening meetings there, and then we were able to go out and look at the alley and see the items they were talking about. They're also wonderful in helping us stage the area and get parking. And last but not least, I'd like to thank Roger Feigart. This was one of his last projects, and his guidance was invaluable to the project. This cooperation helped us complete the project with the cost a little under $85,000 as opposed to the estimate of $98,000. That reduced the assessment rate by over $20 per frontage foot, with the actual rate of $141.37. This could lower the assessment amount for most parcels anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 from the original estimate. This impacts 9 parcels and 5 owners. So kudos to everyone involved. Any questions you might have of me?
Questions? Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to testify on this item? We can now vote on this item.
We just need a motion to assess.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Carl, seconded by Jane. Discussion? Please call the roll.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
Okay, now we need a motion to adjourn.
Yes.
So moved.
Second.
You need to move sine die, please.
Sine die. I move we
Thank you.
adjourn sine die.
Second.
Moved by John, seconded by Jane. Please call the roll.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0.
We are adjourned. Now, welcome to the regular meeting of the City Council. Let's all rise for a Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a period of silent meditation. I pledge allegiance to the flag In accordance with LB 898, a copy of the Open Meetings Act is posted at the back of the chamber. The order of business of the City Council is as follows. The clerk will call items listed on the agenda under public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak on an item should come forward after the clerk reads that item. The applicant and then those in favor should speak first, then those opposed. There'll be an exception to that tonight when we talk about JPA and an alternative proposal of interlocal agreements. Anyone can come up in any order they want to then. The applicant may then make one short rebuttal. Each speaker should begin by stating name, address, and whether you're speaking, what you're speaking in for or opposition to. This evening, we will depart from our customary practice of 5 minutes per speaker because of the number of people who are here, and we're going to limit testimony to 3 minutes per testifier. Part of the purpose of this is to allow us to hopefully end near 7 o'clock, so also people who are wanting to go to the school board meeting at Southwest High School that begins at 7:30 can attend that and testify there as well. After all public hearings, and the council will vote on resolutions and items listed under third reading. On the second and last meetings of the month, immediately prior to adjournment, anyone may speak on any issue not on the agenda for that date, nor planned for a future agenda. Today is an open mics meeting. Please call the first item.
Our first item is our public hearing consent agenda, items 1 through 3.
Would anyone like to testify on any of these items? Next item, please.
All right, if not, we can vote on these items. Items 1A through F and 2A and B were introduced by Raybold.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Jane, seconded by Carl. Discussion? Please call the roll.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Next then are public hearing resolutions. Item 5A, special permit 09022C, application of Mike Anderson, BAM Properties LLC, for an amendment and request a waiver to reduce the west side yard setback to 0 feet on property generally located at 3201 Yankee Hill Road.
Is anyone here to speak on this item?
The planning department here? No planning department?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Next item, please.
All right, next is public hearing ordinances, second reading. I'll call items 6A and 6B together. They are text amendment 18004, amending sections 27.63.110 and 2763.810 of the Lincoln Municipal Code to allow a dwelling unit on the same premises as a garden center or a farm winery. And special permit 18010, application of Les and Patricia Meyer, doing business as Capital View Winery and Vineyards LLC to allow a farm winery at 2361 Whitstruck Road.
Is anyone here to speak on this item? Again, no. No one at all.
I did have a question for the planning director.
Sure.
Once he is here on
Since he's here.
item 5A, if it's possible to have a process by which we return to that item.
Sure, let's just return to that item.
Larian has a question on special permit 09022C.
David Carey with the Planning Department.
Okay.
Dave, thank you. I just wanted to understand better the need for the 0-foot setback and sort of how it would work within the larger context of the site.
Right.
I
So
understand that there's a property to the west that's related, but could you just, do you have a diagram or something you can show us how this is
yes, let me
intended to
try to
work?
get to that real quick here. Generally speaking, this is effectively internal to the owned property, so that it's not going to have an impact in that sense. I'm trying to get to an image.
Is it in effect not a setback? I mean, 0-foot setback is something you almost never see. What are the circumstances that make that just fine in this case?
The fact is that there isn't an impact because there is the joint property line is the same ownership, and the use of the property is consistent with what's already out there as far as the use of the property today for the auto dealership. So there's not going to be a conflict in that sense either. So the use itself, as well as the joint property line, is why this is something that we are confident in suggesting approval.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, I think we're back to 6A, is that correct?
Yes.
Anyone wishing to speak on this item? Next item, please.
Actually, I'm
All right.
sorry, I got a question for David on that one
Okay.
too. David, sorry, don't go.
Dave, yeah.
Let's come back.
David Carey with the Planning Department.
The proposal is to allow people to have a dwelling unit if they own a garden center or a farm winery. And I guess I just wanted to clarify why this normally wouldn't be allowed. And is it to potentially separate hazardous uses from residential uses? Or why did the existing law, why was that in place to begin with?
I think this is a good example of how some of these uses in the past weren't seen as being desired to be together, but we start to look at some of these things like home occupations, in a sense, and farm wineries did not have the exception to allow for the dwelling unit on the property. Since we've been going in the direction of allowing some of that to take place for other uses, the farm winery made sense to allow that. So that's really the background of why we are comfortable with this proposal.
Okay. Now, is this related to the next item?
Yes, they're
Any questions? Does anyone want to testify on the next item? Any questions on the next item? Please come forward.
Can I ask Mr. Carey a question while she's coming
Sure.
forward? Thank you. I just wanted to clarify in this particular, on these items, that the Planning Commission voted its approval and there was no opposition at the meetings. Is that right?
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else wishing to testify, please come forward now. And I'll remind you, since you came in late, all testimony today is limited to 3 minutes per speaker.
3 minutes? Oh, honey, I can do enough damage in a minute. All right. We all know who I am? Because you know what? If I got 3 minutes, you guys know who I am. All right, where are we at on the ordinances?
6B.
Okay. All right. When you gonna do for mayor? Hurry it up. You don't need $500,000, all right? Okay, we are on 6B. Let's see what we got. All right, 6B, special permit. Capital View Wineries and Vineyards, is that what it says? LLC, right? Limited Liability Company, right? To allow a farm, a winery. You know what, yeah. Because where I come from, we were taught faith, family, farm. Once you get your chores done, then you might have time for your friends. And your friends better make sure they're sitting on church come Sunday morning, hangover or not. So sure, let's let them have it. Let's let them have it. And when we let them have it, let's make sure that everybody buys one of these, because guess what? Guess what it is? American Legacy, now feel well, okay? American Legacy Firearms proudly presents the Lincoln Heritage Rifle layaway plans. Wow! It's built on a fully functional 30-30 rifle, state capital, fur trading, March 1st, 1867, oil and gas. All right? Let's make sure. Because on the farm, guess what? Them boys, I'm gonna help you out. I don't like you, but I'm gonna help you out. You know what an 8-second boy is? He on a bull. And he been riding it since he been 7. And it ain't bullshit. It's a bull with the snot and the horns. And you people out here call it extreme. Hey, don't let me hang out, okay, people? Don't let me hang out. Because I'm not real sure what I got on. Because I was teaching them babies how to make puke buckets. Because it takes 20, 40, 60, 80, 90, 100, right? Another 20,000. Now, I like you, so you're out of this, okay? Now, Jeff, you read a book. It takes you $300,000 to write an ordinance to make a puke bucket. I got a 3-year-old that'll tell you, if you're gonna puke, make sure you puke outside, because my mama ain't picking up your puke. That 3-year-old just turned 40 years old. So the 3-year-olds that I'm teaching now, they call me Tia. Christensen, you know Spanish. What's Tia mean? Come on, come on.
Means aunt.
It means auntie. Now, if you calling me auntie, you've been around, right? Christensen, no, wrong one. You, Eskridge. Right, now I can't see. You can do your eyes, it's okay, because I'm done with you. Eskridge, Deputy
That's your time.
Okay, Deputy Ombudsman, State of Nebraska, right? Say yes.
Yes.
At least for the moment. I'm not writing it down, because you know where I live.
Would anyone else like to speak on this item? Next item, please.
That concludes our public hearing. We can vote on these items. Just item 5A, which was introduced by Gaylor Baird.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Illyria and seconded by John. Discussion. Please call the roll.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Next then are our ordinances third reading. Item 7A is approving the Telegraph District Phase 2 redevelopment agreement, introduced by Eskridge.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Carl, seconded by Jane. Discussion. Please call the roll.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Item 7B, amending the fiscal year 17-18 CIP to authorize and appropriate $8,907,652,000 in TIF funds for the Telegraph District Phase 2 project, introduced by Eskridge.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Carl, seconded by John. Discussion. Please
Mr.
call the
Chair.
roll.
Mr. Chair.
Go
Thank
ahead.
you. Last week, we heard some concerns about low-cost housing in Lincoln, and I just want the residents of Lincoln to know that, that we heard those concerns. Don't feel like probably this is the project for that, but, but that said, it was also heard by the developers, and they are certainly willing to look at low-cost housing. And actually, it let me know today that there's been no price point set yet for these apartments, so it's difficult. But the main thing is they're not displacing any homes, they're not tearing down any homes. This is a district that was blighted, that didn't contain homes, and now it will. And so I'm pleased to support this project.
Okay. Carl?
Yes, thanks, and thanks, Cindy. It was important that we had the testimony last week. It did help to raise the issue of the need for affordable housing in our community, and I think it did get attention of both developers and city staff, neighborhood groups, a lot of people. I think we have our marching orders to get busy on this issue.
Okay. Please call the roll.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Item 7C is authorizing issuance of tax allocation bonds for the Telegraph District Phase 2 project, introduced by Eskridge.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Carl, seconded by Jane. Discussion.
I just wanted to chime in. I just wanted to say about this whole package that we heard last week during the hearing about the Telegraph District, that we are growing a new neighborhood in Lincoln. And it's really only possible because of the work that was done to take this land out of the floodplain. And I think it's a really exciting development for our city.
Okay. Telegraph District, good thing. Please call the roll.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Item 7D is the lease agreement with the Roberts Family 1984 Trust for the lease for a 3-year term for use by LPD Northwest Team for a substation at 3220 North 14th Street, introduced by Eskridge.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Carl, seconded by Lyrian. Discussion.
I'm just grateful that we have, that LPD, through their relationships in the community, has a partner that's so generously donated space for the team.
Please call the roll.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Motion carried 7-0. Our resolutions on first reading are items 8A through J. Our loan ordinance on first reading is item 9A. Our pending list date certain are items 10A and B. And our pending list are items 11A through E. Next, we'll have our public hearing on creating the JPA and Lamb's proposal to work within the city's and LPS's budget.
Okay.
We have item 18R87, resolution transferring funds from contingency to pay for 6 additional recruits for the July Police Training Academy to provide an earlier availability of school research officers. A resolution calling for negotiations for an interlocal agreement with Lincoln Public Schools to include the city's commitment to share funding for expanding behavioral health services in schools and expanding city participation and funding for community learning centers to include all Title I schools. A resolution calling for an amendment to the interlocal agreement with LPS to provide 6 school resource officers to serve in the middle schools. Approving the creation of a joint public agency for the city and Lincoln Public Schools to provide protective, preventative, and proactive services for school children, and approving an agreement between the city and LPS to create the Lincoln Safe and Successful Kids Joint Public Agency.
Okay, before we get started on this, that was a lot to go through. I forgot one item earlier. Welcome to Boy Scout Troop 159. Glad to have you here, Troop 159. I'd also like to remind you that we have a limit of time for 3 minutes per testifier, and we'll start with some comments by Lyrian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to let people know, before we proceeded with this public hearing on a number of different items that are related, that over the weekend, I had good discussion with school board members and about what they would like to see as we move forward in our pursuit of a partnership to promote the safety and success of our city's youth. And based on those discussions, it's clear that there is interest in seeing in writing what an alternative to a JPA approach might look like. And up to now, we have had discussion of using interlocals as an alternative, but up to this point, we do not have such a specific proposal to evaluate in writing. We don't have that actual proposal before us. So I'm working to facilitate the drafting of such an interlocal with LPS's School Board President Lanny Boswell. And I want to be clear that this is not a commitment to one approach or the other. Where this will go is to be determined. But what I'm hearing is that it would be preferable to have both approaches fleshed out prior to us making any decisions, and that's what I would like us to do. So I just want people to know, for the record, that that is under consideration. Thank you.
Okay. And I'd just like to note that that's exactly what Ms. Lamb's proposals, resolutions tonight encompass. So,
And if I could make just another comment, thank you. So I did want to make the public and this council aware that I have an amendment to the first resolution to include, or excuse me, the first and third, in order to include a threat assessment officer in each of those. So I intend to offer that amendment, and so anyone that has those concerns, I want to alleviate that right away, because I anticipate that that there would be support for that kind of an amendment. So.
okay, so we're going to go now to city staff. We have some testimony by them, and when they're done, I will get a signal from the chief of staff that they're done, and then I'll open it for everyone else who wants to speak.
Good afternoon. Any improvement to the safety of our schools has to be multifaceted. There is no singular solution. School resource officers and an investigator dedicated to threat assessment and management is one component to this overall picture. So SROs have been part of the Lincoln Police Department and Lincoln Public Schools beginning in 1971 and continuously since 1994. The number of officers assigned to the schools has varied, but the communication, building relationships in advance of unthinkable events, sharing experiences in the classroom, and being another positive influence has remained consistent. Today, Nate Hill, Dave Nelson, Ryan Duncan, Lynette Russell, Megan Nelson, and Mike Holm are SROs in Lincoln Public High Schools. They're husbands, wives, parents, coaches, mentors, members of our community, and officers with a passion to serve kids. Their roles are distinct from the administrative disciplinary processes. Our SROs have advanced training specific to their roles in behavioral health assessment, on implicit bias, de-escalation, and cultural competency. By policy and practice, and now bolstered by an MOU that Jocelyn and City Law will speak to you about soon, employ discretion, recognizing that not every call to quell a disturbance should result in a citation. Currently, we do not have the staffing capacity to immediately supplement officers serving in our schools. We must recruit, extensively vet, and train personnel to fill positions so we can dedicate experienced officers to serve in that capacity. This process can take a year to 18 months. We have a new academy class that begins July 19th of this year. We need authorization a month in advance of this date in order to expedite this timeline, something that's quickly approaching. Physical assaults make up the majority of the incidents we are called to investigate in the schools. That's why projects like Project Restore are so important to addressing the disproportionality that exists. Evidence-based strategies that hold students accountable for behaviors but provide strategies for success, all meant to prevent a deep immersion into the criminal justice system. Attempts to establish a direct causal relationship between the presence of SROs leading to a lifetime of incarceration is a characterization that I do not see. The thought process does a disservice to so many and is in contrast to the resiliency of the human spirit. The proposal in front of you today with the JPA will add 6 school resource officers and a threat assessment investigator. Although designed to protect, their presence, their skills, their passion will prevent victimization, improve relationships, and enhance the opportunity to learn in a safe environment. For me, this JPA, the collaboration, the LPD, LPS, community learning centers, enhancing services for mental and behavioral health is a powerful message that must be repeated whenever the opportunity presents. Public safety is a partnership and a responsibility that we all share. Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Kent Seacrest, attorney that has worked on this project along with several other attorneys, Jocelyn Golden and Chris Connolly. Since 2012, I've been working with the administration and the LPS administration and private funders to seek a more accountable and sustainable model. More off than on during that 6-year period of time, but trying to find that one community model that will assure the community's children have that opportunity to learn in a safe environment.
Can you adjust your mic? I think it's not picking up your voice. There you go. Thank you.
I hope that's better. Yes, thank you. Lincoln citizens have been asking me, and I know you, why is a JPA a better model than an interlocal agreement? Very important question. Let me be clear. Either model, if implemented, can improve school safety and student success. So that's the good news. But in my opinion, the JPA model will have a better and longer lasting success for students, family, and the community at large. For many years, LPS and the city have been dialoguing on what would be the best alternatives. And in that dialogue of alternatives, they've looked at interlocal agreements. And interlocal agreements are a lot like 31 flavors. They all have some pros and cons and some merits, but the question is to get everybody to agree on the same ice cream cone as one community. That's the challenge. And to date, the city administration and the school board the school LPS administration have not been able to identify that one flavor of a consensus on an interlocal, but did reach consensus as an administrations on a JPA model that they have put in front of you. The process has been full of dialogue, and any JPA, or excuse me, any interlocal alternatives that we then go study, realize it's going to take some time. It has not been fast to create the JPA. It won't be fast to decide on what 31 flavors is best for the community, which one to do the important heavy lifting that we must do in this area. The problem, I think, can be stated pretty simply. Everybody talks about interlocal, but nobody's come forward with the specifics, and it's hard. The JPA, the specifics have been brought forward, and people can judge accordingly. But when we talk about the interlocal, it's been a nebulous, what do we mean by that? And that's why it's hard to compare the JPA apple to what I call the undefined fruit that we're comparing to. You have to make assumptions. There's all types of ways to set this JPA up, and we need to be sure we know what's best. The one thing the JPA does better than any interlocal will do is a dedicated funding source. That's the number one. In this case, neither party, if entered into, can unilaterally decide not to fund it without terminating the JPA. So there is an out, but it's a hard out. This is the biggest JPA benefit, in my opinion, is the dedicated public funding sources, which I think children safety and success deserves in this community. The other techniques of an interlocal depends on how you set it up. On the one hand, we can talk about annual funding, but when we do an annual funding interlocals, then it has to go back and forth between the different governing bodies. And if one body says go left and another body says go right, then the JPA or the interlocal process has to figure out how to get two different boards on the same track. And with the different short-term funding priorities that one is faced with annually, it's hard to make a long-term commitment towards kids in an interlocal model along the way. The other issue that I think is important is we could talk about a long-term funding commitment in an interlocal. But I have a feeling my friends, my attorney friends here won't advise you of that because they haven't advised you on long-term funding commitments in the past because they want you to be able to break them if you had to because of funding issues or budget priorities that citizens sometimes bring forth to you. It's a challenge either way, short-term, long-term, about how to fund through an interlocal. But that dialogue could happen if that's what the body wants to go forward with. The other question is, in an interlocal, do you have a governing board or not? If you don't, then there's not going to be as much monitoring of results. There's not going to be as much communication back and forth, change of course as needed. But if you do, then you're creating the same components of whether or not that governing body really has any control over the two elected bodies and how to best process that. Again, issues could be resolved. You just will have some challenges ahead to make it happen. And finally, I think this is the most important to my mind, is that JPA is a partnership agreement. It's not contractual. Yes, it is a contract, but what it is a commitment to create a new governmental entity that has this responsibility. JPA is a partnership and is simply stronger than a simple contractual relationship of an interlocal. And what do I mean by that? Partners tend to go the extra mile helping other partners achieve the partner's objectives. In most contracts I deal with, my client or the other side does the minimum. Not the maximum, does the minimum, because that's what the contract and that's what we're trained to stay in our silo and not look at what's best sometimes because we just look at the contract. A JPA is truly creating a partnership. It is a paradigm shift, and we tend to think that words are important, but at the end of the day, it's going to be the relationship of that governing body that I think will make the true difference and a true paradigm shift. As the world changes, government needs to be changing too. And what's happening here is we have one community, one set of constituents, one set of voters, and they expect both entities to get it right. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions, and these experts can go over any of your questions on
Cindy?
the agreement.
Thank you. Mr. Seacrest, I want to talk about the timing element for just a moment. If a JPA is established, then the agreement is approved by both boards, then what is the tax year in which the JPA's taxing authority would be effective?
Again, the way it's currently drafted is the tax year would be September 1 of this year.
So the property taxes, though, are not computed on our fiscal year. So that's what I'm trying to get straight.
The tax would show up as of December 1st, delinquent on December 31st. But under law, we don't have any problems paying in the following year in April 1st
So it would,
August 1st
but I'm just
of
trying to, so it would be
2019.
retroactive for the whole year of 2018?
No, it would go into your property tax bill in 2019.
And, okay, so it'd be for 2018, but in the property tax bill for 2019?
That's
That would
where it
become
show
due
up.
April 1, 2019?
April, first half April 1, second half August 1.
Okay, and so, and then the collections, typically, we know about our collections in August related to property taxes, and then there's disbursement sometime later in the fall. So I'm wondering, when would be the first time that funds from the 1%, or the 1 cent levy amount would be available to the JPA for use?
You would see the first wave showing up about December 31st of this year, because a lot of people pay their taxes on December 31st or
So
beforehand.
there would be some disbursement December 31st, and,
In my mind, there'd be available funds showing up that could be dispersed.
okay, and so that's not my understanding, but it could go as long as, I can see Mr. Conley wanting to get involved in that.
Yeah,
Do you have an answer for me?
I think what would end up happening is the tax would start to be assessed as of September 1st, but I'm not sure it shows up until 2019.
Okay,
And then, and so we may not see the collections until 2020. We'll have to check with the assessor's office to check, make sure we have that timing correct. But that's the way most of your taxes are billed. Having said that, we are aware of the cash flow, and we are able to make it cash flow until those tax receipts start coming in.
I see, so the city would be lending to the JPA, or?
Would be lending, but we would have monies available, and then it would be reimbursed from
We've got
the
our-
tax receipts.
Our money man here.
Okay,
Please
and-
introduce yourself and answer the question.
I'm Brandon Kaufman, Finance Director for the city. So we do receive taxes on a monthly basis. It just depends on when people are paid, and then those are dispersed out. We do, however, receive 2 primary months of taxes. I think they're June and April, maybe, disbursements. So we get the bulk of our money in 2 primary payments, but we do receive smaller amounts throughout the year.
And we should expect the same for the JPA then, under that 1 cent levy?
Yeah, once the bill, well, with this, it's establishing a tax as well, so those first bills will go out in December,
Okay,
and then payments will start to trickle in after that.
thank you. And I just have one follow-up question, I think, Mr. Seacrest, that you'll answer. Okay, so in this particular, so we're looking at probably getting funding for the 2019 year, but in this particular JPA agreement, the first 600,000 goes to the city before there's any computation of the other allocations, right?
Correct, 620,000 is the projection.
Okay, and can you answer for me why the city gets a kickback of 600,000 for the 17-18 fiscal year?
Are you asking why the city would fund? The city is levying or loaning, in effect, the levy.
And I understand that for in the future. What I'm wondering is why the 600,000 is paid back for the 17-18 fiscal year.
Because otherwise it would show up on the city tax budget that you are approving as of September 1 of this year, that an extra $620,000.
Okay, yes.
Can I take a shot at
I'm
answering
sorry.
that question? Lynn Johnson with Lincoln Parks and Recreation. We would not be reimbursed for the current fiscal year expenses. It would be funding that would be allocated towards next fiscal year. So the 600,000 from the JPA would be new revenue that would be part of the revenue for next year's budget. And then those funds would be directed within the overall budget. So we're not being reimbursed. We're essentially providing revenue to help support next year's budget.
Okay, so but the agreement calls for the city receiving 600,000 for the 17-18 fiscal year.
We use we use the 17-18 fiscal year as the base, so that we knew essentially the base that we'd be working from, and then it's escalated based on an inflationary factor that's built into the agreement for future years.
Okay,
So we're not
thank you.
being reimbursed. It's really that base factor that we use for calculating future amounts.
I'm sorry that it took 5 people to answer
I'd
my
like to make
question.
one correction. I think our Finance Director meant to say April and August are when we get our 2 primary dates for property taxes.
Okay. Jane?
Perhaps this is for Kent. Kent, can you explain whether we go through an interlocal or a JPA, we're asking the City of Lincoln and the school board to contribute new funding for the 3 items that have been identified.
That is correct. We are talking about school resource officers, 6 of them, a threat assessment officer, mental health, behavioral health people, services, and then expansion of community learning center opportunities.
So whether we put it through a JPA and use that property tax authority or go directly to these entities, the school board and the city council, I think everyone should be clear. We're asking the community to help fund this initiative.
That is correct.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, John?
Well, I'd like to follow up on my colleague's question there. I thought that all the representations we've had and news releases from the mayor and the superintendent have been their intent, they've used that word intention, is to have no tax increase.
The commitment is that we would be having the JPA tax 1 cent, but that in the coming fiscal year budget process, both sides have indicated a commitment to make it levy neutral, so they would be correspondingly together reducing their tax amount by that same 1%.
But you just told my colleague it would be an increased commitment in money, funding.
Well, there is an increased commitment. I mean, right now, there's 400,000 proposed for new mental health dollars that aren't in the budget anywhere. There'd be additional money for community learning centers. We do not have in the budget 6 resource or a threat assessment officer. So somewhere along the line, there's going to be a reduction somewhere else if you're going to stay levy neutral.
Okay.
Well, I'm not quite done. But, okay, well, I think there's been a lot of talk, and in the news releases that there's intent not to increase it, that both entities would lower and stay within those budgets, but just dedicate that to the JPA. Mr. Sechrest, when you were hired by this group to study this, as I recall,
Yes.
what was your mission? How was that defined?
What was my mission? My mission was, like I started on a volunteer basis in 2012, working with the private sector, the city, and the LPS to try to find a more sustainable model for community learning centers and be before and after school programs and what makes kids feel right to learn. So that's been my mission. Recently, I've been asked to help facilitate to be sure we could get the 2 administrations to not only be on the same page, but on the same verse. And that was an interesting process, and to their credit, they got on the same page as well as the same verse, and that's the product you have in front of you today.
So was your mission to design a JPA?
My mission was to find the model that was sustainable along the way. Early on in 2012, when we did that process, as JPA was identified with a 1/2 cent sales tax, or a portion of that, as the best model. We studied it again, we looked at the alternatives again, and again, the model that seemed to reach the best consensus among the administration was the JPA model.
Well, I made notes just to mention here, as you gave your testimony, you were making made comments on JPA versus interlocal, and I think I kept hearing you say, well, if the interlocal is designed right, it can be like the JPA. And so
I said it could get increased funding and support for kids' education. I don't think you heard me correct. I think the JPA does a better job year in and year out long-term than in an interlocal will.
Why?
But why? For the reasons I stated, and I don't know if Roy wants me to go back over them.
Okay.
Let me just say something here. Part of the reason we've organized this meeting the way we are is to be able to allow the public who are here to testify and still get out and go over to the meeting where they can testify in front of the Lincoln Public Schools. So I'm going to ask council members to keep that goal in mind and staff to make their comments as brief as they possibly can to get through this, and then open it up for the public to testify. So please, go ahead.
Well, I guess there's one more piece that we would like to go over. Jocelyn's going to speak a little bit about the memorandum of understanding that is before you.
And that's item 8I on your agenda. It's only on first reading today, and it's for vote and public hearing next week, but we did just want to discuss that memorandum of understanding is between Lincoln Public Schools and the City of Lincoln, and it sets forth the division between school discipline by LPS and law enforcement by school resource officers that are from LPD. This MOU is really a memorialization of what's already occurring with high school SROs. It's really a big picture document that sets forth goals and also provides the role that SROs will play, not just in the high schools, but in the middle schools through this JPA, including responding to threats to safety, responding to victims of crime, kids who are in mental health crisis, and missing persons. And this MOU provides that schools generally are going to be responsible for school discipline issues, not SROs, and that those SROs won't be involved in school discipline. One other thing that this MOU provides for that is that there's going to be an annual program review with creation of a report that will be sent back to each of the two entities so that they can review on an annual basis basic metrics. And then this MOU will also be renewed year to year. That will allow on a yearly basis, if there's changes in law or if there are circumstances that might change, that MOU can incorporate those changes from year to year. So we're available for any questions you might have.
With that, we're just available for questions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hoppy? Okay.
Hello, I'm Dennis Hoffman from Family Service. I had put together this PowerPoint. I don't know if we really need it or if you guys can see it.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Family Service and Child Guidance have provided individual and group therapy and family therapy to students in Lincoln Public Schools for many years. The kids we see confront the impacts of trauma, addiction, serious emotional disturbance, abuse, and neglect. For many students, anxiety and depression are prevalent regardless of age, and it's not uncommon for kids to report thoughts of hurting themselves or others. Our therapists are trained to assess these situations and bring in additional supports when needed. We intervene early to prevent a tragedy of any kind. Today, Family Service and Child Guidance provide therapy and support in 28 schools. We provide the support and the skills needed to deal with the daily challenges students face to help them succeed in school and in their future. The partnership between providers and LPS works. LPS provides us access and coordinated care in a familiar setting for students, and the providers bring leverage resources such as clinical oversight, training, and therapy for the entire family in a cost-effective way. We also know the demand for our services is greater than our capacity. It's not unusual for kids to wait 3 to 4 months to see a therapist, and not all schools have access to community partners. A Duke University study involving more than 10,000 American teenagers revealed that more than half of adolescents with psychiatric disorders go untreated. For those who do receive treatment, schools are the most likely source. Research also tells us that the therapeutic relationship is the greatest predictor of success. Programs like ours remove barriers so kids can build those relationships. We know this because LPS staff, the students, and their parents report improved relationships at school and at home. We know that drug use decreases and that the mental health symptoms are less impactful. Coordinated and comprehensive behavioral health care is a necessary component of a full-service community school. We know that the majority of kids with behavioral health problems are not violent. However, it is widely accepted that mental health care does need to be part of the school safety plan. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Next staff testifier.
Good evening. My name is Barb Bettine. I'm the president and CEO of the Lincoln YMCA's. Thank you for allowing me to be here this evening representing community agencies who work alongside Lincoln Public Schools in the city to provide CLCs. The Y has officially been involved in CLCs for over 20 years, and began providing a more comprehensive delivery model at Elliott as early as 1996. As we all know, the adversity, barriers, challenges have increased tremendously over the last 20 years, including a stable funding source year to year to support the CLCs. The decision for the Y to become a community partner for CLCs was based on several factors. CLCs are about collaboration, so is the Y. We work for the common good. CLCs are more about prevention, more than intervention, so that is also a stable value for the Y. CLCs are based on sound educational practices. CLCs match many of our goals and objectives and our 3 focus areas, which are youth development, healthy living, and social responsibility. And finally, CLCs are about helping students in a safe environment excel academically, attend school regularly, achieve physical, social, and emotional health, and finally have hope for the future. The Y knew it would take effort, fundraising dollars, operational dollars, coordination, energy by volunteers, staff, and members to sustain CLCs and provide these expanded learning opportunities. We also knew it would take collaboration from other agencies, grants, the school board, and the city, because CLCs are making a difference. Each year, each CLC goes through intensive evaluation and observation process. From these processes, the staff receive feedback and continuous improvement plans of what the children need. Each CLC has a comprehensive annual plan that we work with the school and solidify goals that really help children achieve at higher goals. In addition, the real worth, I believe, of the program is seen when a child gets to participate in a variety of programs, clubs, activities in a safe setting with caring, trained adults. Statistically, data has shown that CLCs help children improve academically. In our world today, there are so many needs and often not enough dollars to address these needs. We believe, and I hope you do too, that CLCs are a worthy investment. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Nick Cusick. I'm testifying in favor of the JPA approach to funding what has been identified almost universally as key priorities for the city of Lincoln coming up. We've talked plenty about those, so I don't need to talk any more about those, and I applaud the community and you and the folks at Lincoln Public Schools for supporting the general nature of those priorities. I'm wearing 2 hats today. First, as an employer, I have about 120 employees. At any point in time, I have about 20 vacancies in our organization, and we've been strong supporters of many of the agencies that provide CLC after-school programs. And in fact, just this last, I think 5 weeks, we've had students, high school students from the Lighthouse down in our organization after-school program, learning about what we do at Bison. So I think as I've kind of gone through my own assessment of how best to satisfy what is a great mission, and that is these missions we talked about, I've kind of landed on 3 primary mantras. I think the first is the sequestration of money. And I think for me, I've come to believe that the sequestration of money by putting it into a JPA is indeed the best method to sequester, to keep it out of the annual discussion of do we fill potholes, or do we mow parks, or do we build bike trails, or do we remove ash trees, or whatever any of all those other priorities are, or at the LPS level, do we pay teachers more? Do we hire more teachers? Do we get bigger classrooms? Do we buy more computers, et cetera? So I think the sequestration is one of my mantras. The second one is transparency. The LPS budget and the city budget are incredibly complex. When you have a very narrow mission and you have 1 cent to work with, it's pretty easy to be transparent. It's pretty easy for people who are way smarter than I to do the city budget and the LPS budget, but I think even I could look at the JPA budget with the couple $1 million and be able to figure out, are we spending the money where we said we were going to spend the money? And the third priority is avoiding mission creep. We all know that mission creep happens in organizations. It happens in almost every organization, and I think with a fairly narrow, well-defined mission, it'll stay on course, and the JPA will provide that. I do believe it's something that's certainly good for the city. The purposes of the JPA or a joint or a interlocal agreement are fine, and when all is said and done, I believe the JPA is the most dependable approach to that. So,
okay, thank you. One more staff testifier. And then we'll be open to public testimony.
Good evening. Lynn Johnson again with Lincoln Parks and Recreation. My role this evening is to talk a little bit about what Ms. Lamb asked about, which is the proposed funding that would be dedicated to Parks and Recreation involvement with the Community Learning Center initiative. As we've discussed in the past, Parks and Recreation is responsible for being involved with 6 community learning centers. The city also provides grants to support 3 additional community learning centers. With each of these sites, like essentially all of the 26 sites across the initiative, we have braided funding that supports the city's package, or the city's participation. There are federal grants, there are local grants, there are LPS Title I funds, there are user fees. We charge a registration fee for participation in programs, and then there are agency funds, or in our case, what would be city general funds. As we discussed, the net cost to the city for participation in the CLC initiative this year is about $607,000. That would be inflated next year based on the anticipated CPI to about $620,000. I don't think I did a great job of answering Ms. Lamb's question last week during the council work session. That amount is net of the user fees that we receive from families whose children participate in CLC. So that $600,000 is a net figure of expenditures on behalf of the city. If I put on my Parks and Recreation hat, I think there's a significant advantage to funding our participation in the CLC initiative with JPA funds, because they are dedicated, as we've heard, sequestered funds. They don't have to compete then in the overall city budget. And I do think that's a benefit. One of the other things I wanted to do this evening is Barb Bartle with Lincoln Community Foundation could not be here this evening. She prepared a letter that I would like to distribute. I've got a copy here for the original for the city clerk, and then copies for each of the city council members. And this letter is written from Barb's perspective as one of the tri-chairs of the initiative. So Barb has, you heard her say that she's seen sometimes as the grandmother of the CLC initiative. She has a tremendous amount of background and experience, but she also is one of the tri-chairs who today provides direction and guidance for the initiative. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, what we're going to do now, council members, is I'm going to ask the staff to remain here until all the public has testified, and then you can ask your questions. But I want to give the public a chance to do this. Please come forward. I want you to use both microphones, please. While one person is talking, you can be preparing and signing, and please sign in before you leave the podium. And 3 minutes, please.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members of the council. Let me first thank you for your community service. I'm Dwayne Mays, and I am sharing some of the concerns with the JPA on behalf of the Lincoln Branch NAACP. Our goal is to assure that the students of color in Lincoln Public Schools receive the same opportunities and considerations as other students. These students have few voices to speak for them. The 18-page JPA proposed by the Lincoln City and the school board has shortcomings that the Lincoln Branch NAACP feel must be changed. The workings need to implement it, that needed to be implemented in the JPA have not been added, thus making it untenable, doing harm to a large portion of students in the LPS. A particular concern is the assignment of SROs to the middle school under the assumption of safety. Some studies have shown that SROs in schools did not increase safety. We, NAACP, we're concerned that a militaristic school system as proposed in this JPA is just another pipeline to prison for young children of color. We have had resource officers in Lincoln Public Schools for a number of years. Based on this data, what have we learned? Are the students of color expelled at a higher rate in Lincoln Public Schools than white students? Why? Were students expelled at a rate higher with the implementation of resource officers in the school? Why? For some strange reason, the information has not been maintained. Studies from Washington, so therefore we Look, studies from Washington University would show that the presence of officers increased the likelihood of students being involved in juvenile or criminal justice system for virtually every offense that occurred in schools, including lower-level offenses like fighting and theft. Once the student is arrested, they are likely to graduate or not graduate, and more likely to drop out of school and be arrested again, according to Dr. Nance. Studies have shown that one of the concerns experienced with SROs is that more and more discipline problems are shifted to the SROs, especially with increased numbers. Often the SROs become the disciplinarians for the school. The JPA places more guns
Thank
in
you,
the
sir.
school.
Thank you very much. Next testifier.
Terry Ray Gambino Pope Gonzalez. Turn this thing on so we can see this. Vowing to never forget 9/11. Bernie, do you know why I'm here for you? When I've been coming in front of this, whatever you guys are, Jerry Shoecraft was right there. Let me talk for 45 minutes. That's before you people poisoned my neighborhood. All right? I love your color, don't I? Do you know what it cost me to get your color? Now, this man here smells just like Honor. Jeff B. Meister. I don't say your name right, but this man right here. Now, this man, Nick, I got a Nick, but his name is Dominic. All right? I also got a Richie, whose name is Richie Incognito. So I didn't one time have any problems with Richie Incognito, did I? No. This is your problem. Little kids in my neighborhood, they call white chocolate. Okay? What's that mean? I don't care what that means. And the he, she, I don't care what that means either. Now let's be fair. I can't hear. Let's be transparent, right? I like Alan's. You make sure you tell him to come bring me as many signs as I did for you. All right? Now, am I independent? You damn straight I am, because I'm not from here. You know how I know you don't care about your children? You know how I know? Because you got rich people blowing themselves up after being married 35 years. Now, did I have any idea what color they are? No. I just know they were rich people married for 35 years, the same house 20 years. And I know that B. Meister had to go there. And did I do this to you, B. Meister? Yes, I did. Because I punked him, did I not? When you guys were having him be the chief. What'd I say? I like red. Because I like the fireman. Because who in their right mind is going to be running into that building on fire when everybody else is running out? That's how I know you do not love your children. Because if you did, and you are not the boss, you know who the boss is? He's bald-headed. So whoever has been in the power or the position of leadership, do I have bipolar? No. I have POW, pissed off woman. All right? Now what you people did to my neighborhood was wrong, and you know that. Those people got there in the 1800s. So you know when you did all your little puke bucket things? My little 3-year-old's laughing at you. That $10 word she used, I said, well, I don't know what it means. It means she's a crybaby. Now, if you do not go for mayor, I'm going to find that, what's his name, Harrington, little boy? Because he'll like that bottle club, won't he? And he'll have Mama T behind him.
Thank you.
I got to go to the school board. Where is it?
Southwest High School.
Okay. I don't have a clue where that is. Somebody get me there. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dion Keys, and I'm speaking on behalf of the SROs from a personal perspective, from a parent perspective. 2 years ago, my son, who is a senior this year at Lincoln Northeast, was having lunch in the school cafeteria with other students. There was an iPod that was left on the table, and upon leaving the table, the iPod disappeared. I got a call from an administrative person at Lincoln Northeast stating that they wanted to talk to my son about the possible whereabouts of this iPod. In doing so, they never mentioned to me that there was a resource officer present or what exactly he was going to be asked about. I assumed they were just going to ask basic questions. I later got a call.
This is kind of annoying to me. Just, did you get it fixed now? On your cell phone?
It's her. She's got it fixed.
Great. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm just distracted and I want to listen
Well,
to it.
can I have my time,
Yes,
my
you
full
may.
time?
Of course,
Okay.
yes. Yes.
So with that, I later received a call stating that my son was receiving a referral. And at first, I didn't really understand what that meant. I grew up in the Lincoln Public Schools. Referral meant you were going to go talk to the principal. But it didn't mean that. It meant that he was getting a ticket. That's the word that we use, referral, but it's really a ticket for the juvenile, for minors. So he receives this ticket not because they had proof that he had this iPod, but because he refused to give information about who he thought had the iPod. So my child ended up in having to go to diversion services because you either did that or you went to court because it was truly a ticket, not a referral. We got all of that taken care of, but my concern is if these types of things are happening and everybody keeps saying that it's going to be, these resource officers are there to take care of more at-risk type of behaviors, and we're going to place more resource officers at a middle school level, what is the protection for these young kids? His understanding was, you say that it's resource officers build relationships and that kids feel more comfortable, but he doesn't feel more comfortable. He didn't feel more comfortable. He felt very intimidated and very threatened. And so not having any parental support there, not having anybody to really stand up for him, he was at a disadvantage. And I know that there are other persons that have experienced that. I couldn't get them to come tonight, but I know that it happens, and it happens to a lot of minority students. So I need to know what your plan is to make sure that these types of things don't happen to children of color. And I think that you really need to take a close look at all of the data, and of course there's no data present, but there needs to be. Why isn't there information that really speaks to what happens in these situations? Those are the answers that I would like to have answered before you go forward with a project like this. Because it does happen, and he's not a kid that's in trouble. He's not a kid that had prior any incidents, none of those types of things. But yet, this happened to him. Thank you.
Thank you.
I provided you a handout. Good evening. My name is Brad Beam. I live at 3710 Woods Avenue. First, let me state, I want Lincoln to have excellent public schools. Furthermore, maintaining safe schools is very important and should be a priority. However, I am here to speak against establishing a new joint public agency. We do not need an additional taxing authority. Establishing an additional taxing authority will only add to the excessive tax burdens already placed on Lincoln residents. When I moved back to Lincoln from Austin, Texas, I was astonished by the excessive taxes and fees imposed on Lincoln residents compared to what I experienced in Austin. The 2018 tax rates comparison of states produced by WalletHub is evidence of my belief that Lincoln residents are excessively taxed. I've provided you a state-by-state comparison that aggregates together real estate tax, vehicle property tax, income tax, sale and excise taxes includes a tax on gasoline. It's alarming to see that Nebraska is ranked as the third worst state in the United States for effective total state and local tax rates on median U.S. household income. Only Connecticut and Illinois are ranked worse than Nebraska, and this is very concerning. I might have a different position on this issue if the Lincoln Public Schools would have demonstrated fiscal discipline in establishing prior annual budgets. Most recently, LPS had an opportunity to lower the mill levy rate when residents experienced large increases in property valuations. LPS chose not to return any of the tax dollars back to property owners. This resulted in LPS receiving a tax windfall. At the LPS budget meetings, I remember Dr. Standish explaining several reasons for not reducing the mill levy, including her belief that LPS would receive state aid this year, less state aid this year. Well, we found out that LPS did not receive less state aid, but in fact received more state aid. Has LPS offered to return the money back to the taxpayers? No. Because LPS has not demonstrated fiscal discipline in the past, establishing a new JPA would only add to the excessive tax burdens already placed on Lincoln residents. Please vote no on creating a new joint public agency. I want to remind you, one, is that there's no direct accountability to the voters with a JPA. Like I have the opportunity to come address you all or to the school board. I'm concerned that I don't have direct opportunities to express my concern to the GPA. I want to address or direct your attention to this map, please. The blue states are the states that have the lowest rate of taxation. The blue states are the states that have the lowest rate of taxation. The white states have the highest. And if you look at this, you'll notice Nebraska, being right in the middle of the country there, has a white outline or a white structure.
Thank you, sir.
We're just at a disadvantage, so thank you very much.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just if I could correct the record
Sure.
on that just for a second. JPAs are, again, a public agency. They're open meetings law, just like this would be, so you would have that opportunity.
But I don't have a chance to vote for members of the JPA.
Members of the JPA or
I
city
know,
council or
but
school board.
I
so-
understand, but I have a direct opportunity to
Yeah.
vote for you as well as a school board member, which I don't have for a JPA. Thank you.
Okay.
Good evening. My name's John Zlonick. I have 3 daughters, 2 of which have graduated from LPS. The third is a junior right now at Southwest. I'm for security in our public schools, and the learning community has been discussed. I'm against the JPA. I'm for less government. I'm against more government and additional taxing authority. LPS received additional monies last year, as this gentleman just referred to, from the personal property tax increases, and spent it all. If security was a priority, why wasn't that addressed then? You all received more monies last year. Why wasn't it addressed then? LPS has $29 million more coming this year, 20 from the state, 9 million from the commercial property taxes. If this is important as we all think it is, they'll find the money for it. Interlocal agreements have been around for a while. I think our chief of police said since 1970, we've had resource officers and interlocal agreements in place since then or prior to then. Again, I'm for less government. I'm for open discussion and dialogue about priorities and monies spent, and I'm concerned about what's going to happen at a JPA, and is it truly open? Is that in writing somewhere, and can somebody point that out, to have open public meetings? I'm against more bureaucracy, overhead, and potential waste and mismanagement. I'm against what is sure to be more taxes, as already been testified, as the city and LPS take all their money, plus the JPA monies. There's been a commitment or an intent to not have an increase this year in total levies. What happens next year in 2019? I support the proposal by City Councilperson Lamb to expand the interlocal agreements already in place. I urge you not to vote for the JPA with this carve-out, or as somebody testified for, as a sequestration. Don't create another taxing authority. Enough is enough. Thank you to council members and also the chief of staff who replied to my email earlier on this topic, and thanks to you all for your service and time.
Thank you. Next testifier.
Good evening. My name is Kobe Mack, appearing on behalf of the Lincoln Independent Business Association, LIBA. Tonight, the City Council has a couple of different plans to help provide security for our schools. We want to continue our support for Lincoln Public Schools by announcing our endorsement of additional school resource officers, the threat assessment officer, the new social worker, community learning centers, and all parts of the plan. We support it all. In the community, however, there's major disagreement about creating a joint public agency, JPA, and the new tax to fund the security measures. LIBA supports the goals, but we stand firmly against creating another JPA government body. Councilwoman Cindy Lamb has put forward amendments to your existing interlocal agreements in order to provide for school security. This is a reasonable proposal, and it has served our city and our schools with SROs and CLCs. For SROs, for 30 years. We need safety, we don't need bureaucracy. LIBA joins school board members Lanny Boswell and Matt Schulte, who are concerned that the JPA proposal is being touted as levy neutral this year. There is nothing to prevent the city or LPS from increasing their levy in future years. In fact, Mr. Boswell already said taxes will go up. He commented on both the city and school levy, saying, and I quote, While there has been discussion of offsetting the levy in the first year, no one has promised that we will continue that into the second year. And in fact, in my discussions with staff, I believe we will need to use that levy next year. I don't think it's out of line to assume that next year, both of our levies will go back up, end quote. Plain and simple, this would be a tax increase. You can fund the security needs without a JPA. It's been pointed out that Lincoln Public Schools will get about $29 million in new money this year from both the state and from the commercial reevaluation. The city itself is going to get a minimum of $2 million in new money this year from just the commercial property reevaluation. That is a total of $31 million. You only need $2 million to fund the things that you're wanting to fund. So we ask that you support the goals, but let's find another way other than a JPA. I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next testifier.
Good evening. My name is Patrick Conway, 1545 Garrett Lane, resident of District 3. I stand before you as a member of the Parents United for Greater School Security. I've not been authorized to speak on their behalf, but I'm speaking as a parent. The proposed JPA, according to this draft copy I've read, addresses protective programming through school resource officers, preventative programming through behavioral health services, and proactive programming through community learning centers. Article 2, Section 2, under programs, states that refers to funding collected by the JPA, saying, quote, not less than 40% of the net funding received through the levy allocated in Article 8 shall be used for proactive programming. In other words, there is a floor of 40% of the net revenues that will go towards CLCs. That same paragraph refers to SRO funding by stating up to 30% of the net funding received through the levy allocated in Article 8 shall be used for proactive programming. A ceiling or an upper limit, but no minimum. I'm neither an attorney nor an accountant, but I know how to read. I've been to enough bait and switch sales to know that when an offer is for up to, that means anywhere from 0 to the upper limit. And I know that when language is used is no less than, that means the sky's the limit. Conceivably, the JPA could give absolutely no money to support school resource officers and still be operating according to the document that gave it life. Words have meaning. And I'm sure that the language used to create this JPA was carefully crafted to ensure that the writer captured exactly what Mayor Beitler wanted in it. What our students deserve is not an exercise in creative wordplay. Our students need the mentorship, guidance, and first responder capability of at least an additional 12 school resource officers in order to have one in each middle school and an opportunity for routine presence in elementary schools. Our students need to have real secure entrances at their schools. Our students, faculty, and administrators need the support and encouragement to train and drill regularly for all hazards, not waiting until the second semester for a lockdown drill. Our schools need consistent policies for school security before, during, and after the classroom portion of the day. The time has come to make a decision. Do you give nothing more than lip service to the issue of school safety and security, or do you make a commitment to the students of Lincoln Public Schools of today and tomorrow by going all in? The eyes of Lincoln and the rest of Nebraska are upon you. It's your turn to do what's right.
Thank you. Next testifier.
Hi, my name's Lang Anderson. I'm just a simple taxpayer. I used to live right next door to Jane Rabel's parents. So Jane and I, full disclosure, have known each other for quite some time. And I've contributed to a couple of you folks up there, campaign contributions. I'm here today because of the discussion about property taxes. You must be living, I would imagine, in a bubble, because there's discussion of a special session of the legislature to deal with property taxes, a petition drive dealing with property taxes, yet you're here today thinking of ways to increase property taxes. Don't you all see the paradox in that? Maybe not. I've lived in Nebraska over 50 years. I remember the Devaney Sports Center, it was going to be a temporary tax of 5 cents a pack on cigarettes back in the early 70s. Anybody remember that? I was a smoker back then. They're still collecting that tax we were told, we need a sports center because the Coliseum's falling apart. Well, the Coliseum's still there, the Vandy Sports Center is there, and they're still collecting the tax. The half-cent sales tax increase up in Omaha in the mid-'70s, it was going to be a temporary thing, still collecting it today. We were told when the statewide lottery came in, it would be exclusively used for education. Now we're using it to support the state fair and other things. As was stated earlier, the school board kept all of the property tax increase. Detroit at one time was the wealthiest city in the world, as you all know, in the 50s and 60s. Today it's bankrupt. Stockton, California was the 15th wealthiest city in the world in the 50s and 60s. Today it is bankrupt. That didn't happen overnight. It happened because of higher taxes, increased regulations, and eventually the folks who actually pay taxes leave. Nebraska was recently, I think it was a U.S. News and World Report, listed as the single worst state in the nation to retire in. Part of that is your responsibility. The school year is coming to an end. You have 3 months with no school. You have time to think through this, in my opinion, and come up with a better solution. Thank you.
Next testifier.
Hello, I'm Cheryl Bullard, 2709 Kipling Circle here in Lincoln. I'm a member of Parents United for Greater School Security, and I'm a grandmother of an LPS elementary student. I'm here tonight to once again show support for school resource officers in LPS middle schools. Parents United is not a politically affiliated group, and therefore we do not show support for either the JPA or the interlocal agreement. We've identified pros and cons for each proposal, and we've talked a lot, we've looked it over, we've held meetings. But Parents United continues to request, our main request is the 12 SROs in all middle schools. We would be happy with 6 SROs for starters, but our goal remains the 12, 1 in each one. I just personally feel that if you do the 6, it's going to wash out your results. You're not going to have the good outcome that you want. But hopefully we can start with the 6, and we'll be happy with that, and we can build to the 12. So we have 1 in each of the middle schools, and they also cover the elementaries. Now, as a private citizen, I have 2 concerns, and Patrick pretty well filled you in on most of them, I think, on both of them. Anyway, how the JPA is written, I've looked at this, and I sit there in my living room, and it just doesn't make sense to me. The CLCs and mental health section has the minimum amount, but they have no ceiling. But yet the SROs are up to the $400,000. Does that mean that we get the one risk assessment officer, which I agree with Chief Blymeister, excuse me, that is very important. We need to extend that to 3 risk assessment officers. But also then, do we not get the 6 SROs? I mean, is it going to be 0? Is it going to be 400,000? Are we going to get the 1 plus the 6? There's no promises made anywhere. It's iffy. And I so see this, just looking at it, that CLCs and mental health is very important. I love CLCs. I volunteered in them. I thoroughly support them, and I understand that. But I also have a passion for the SROs and for safety and security for our kids. And those middle students, we just had an incident in Nebraska City. When is that going to happen in Lincoln? Are we going to respond well? Are we going to be prepared? I have, as a health educator, I've looked at some of the security for LPS, and that's why I'm on this group. I want to help make it better. I see lots of holes. I see lots of things that can go wrong, and I really want to improve on that. So, thank you.
Next testifier.
Well, good evening, everyone. Kyle Fisher, appearing tonight on behalf of the Realtors Association here in Lincoln. I want to first begin by commending Councilwoman Laren Gaylor Baird for her opening comments. I think that really set the right tone to say that this council is at least open to discussing the concerns of folks tonight, and I think that's a great step. Commend you all for that. I passed out an official letter signed by myself on behalf of the Board of Directors. I'll be brief because I think that'll serve as our record for tonight, and just sum it up as this. Everything that's contained in the plan put forth for the JPA is of utmost importance to us. School safety is of utmost importance to us. But I want to echo the comments that were said. For our group, it's about setting priorities. And you sequester by setting priorities in what you do. And each year, and every other year for you, every year for the school board, they get to look and see what is their priority. And we believe, as realtors, that with the money you collect today, this should be your number one priority, to commit to the safety of our children. And so with the dollars you get today, there shouldn't be any question. This is what you should be doing. You can accomplish that in any number of ways, but we would not support doing it through a joint public agency. So I'll let the letter speak for itself, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Next testifier.
My name is Jim Bunch, and I live in Northeast Lincoln. And I've looked at the JPA documents, and I've looked at Councilwoman Lamb's detailed proposal. And as a taxpayer and resident of Lincoln since 2009, I find that as a property owner, the tax burden is already substantial. And I think that the proposal to use intergovernment agencies adequately addresses the need. The need is there. School safety and resource officers are valuable. After a career as a Department of Defense civilian in 2013, I became a teacher in a district, not LPS, and I see on a daily basis the effectiveness of the resource officer in the building that I work in. One thing that caught my attention as the city officials, the city employees, and the public agency contractors were speaking, the only one who talked about safety was the chief of police. And I thought that's where this whole thing started. And now I look at these line items and I see over $600,000 for the CLCs. And again, we're here for safety. And what I see here is I see the potential for another government bureaucracy that will become a financial black hole for all these other pet projects. So thank you for your time. Thank you for everything you do. And again, I speak against the JPA and in support of using the expanded intergovernment agency agreements. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening. My name is Jake Kirkland. I live at 5541 Limestone Road, North Lincoln. I would like to express my concern regarding the earlier comments regarding resource officers in schools. I had an opportunity to visit with some resource officer and police officer over the weekend to try to get their candid thoughts on where they felt they were with this issue. And as was stated earlier, the parent that talked about a situation, and many of us that are here tonight because we are a voice for the students of color, I've heard so much conversation in here this evening that I'm a little appalled, because if we are truly talking about safety, we could get guns off the streets if we really wanted to do that, okay? Secondly, there's the other reality that if you want to look at data, and particularly in the Lincoln Public School System and even in the city of Lincoln, of young people having a need for some mental health counseling and social workers. Put the money there if you're really concerned about them, if nothing else. The other reality, who's talking about some sort of training if you're going to have this program? Who's talking about multicultural training for these officers? How do they go about being selected to even be involved in this program? And as we look across this board, there's very few representation of color. I hear so many comments, and I keep hearing our students, but whose students are we really talking about? And I have a concern about that. And if nothing else, I would hope I believe it's a done deal. I really believe that. But you are in a position to make a decision on some things, and I hope that you will go back to the drawing board and really look at some things. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next testifier.
Great. My name is Jeff Cole. I'm here in support of the JPA, and my role is the network lead for Beyond School Bells. That's Nebraska's statewide after-school network, and it's a program of Nebraska Children and Families Foundation. I'm not a native Nebraskan. I chose to live here because I think we have developed something really special in Lincoln. It's not the mountain views or the oceanfront views, but I think we've invested very wisely, that our predecessors have invested wisely, to create a great quality of life that's the envy of many across the nation. When I first moved here, a wise citizen told me we drink from wells that others have dug. And I think this today represents an opportunity for you to consider your contribution to that long-term process of making thoughtful investments to community well-being. Those of you who are elected officials have more opportunities than most of us to make that kind of contribution. I live in the near South, get to walk by the Capitol and get to read that sign on the Capitol building, political society exists for the sake of noble living. And I applaud you for considering the creation of a JPA, which would serve many important needs, many of which we've heard about today, but would further that goal of noble living. I really appreciate the three main points and the systematic nature of combining protective, preventative, and proactive forces together. So, JPAs were designed by the legislature to give you guys, elected officials, the ability to come together to solve complex problems that don't fit in neat little baskets, and to do so in a way I've heard many people talk about that sequester those dollars for long-term use and long-term wise investments. This kind of a sophisticated 21st century approach to a new problem, this wasn't a problem we had previously, but to a new problem that can impact all Lincoln youth, regardless of their income or socioeconomic background. I really like the stability of a JPA because I think it makes a strong statement about public support. And I think we're moving into an era of public-private partnerships. And if Lincoln can say we are making, as a public entity, a strong commitment to this, it will attract additional private dollars. This funding, as many people have said, is not enough to solve the problems, but it can be a lure for additional private funding from citizens of this community, regional funders, national and federal. This will make us much more competitive as we're looking at a competitive economic environment, that we can pull in more dollars to support the youth and the security of our citizens and our students. I also like the transparency. I think the transparency that comes with a JPA will create a new level of responsiveness in the CLCs. That's what I'm particularly focused on, because I think it'll create a mechanism that brings in more public transparency. I think that's a fantastic thing, because the research on this is crystal clear. When young people have more of these kinds of opportunities, they attend school, their behaviors are better, and ultimately their coursework improves. And I think we can all agree that that's something we want to
Thank you, sir.
work for.
Before you begin, sir, let me just get an idea for folks out there. Please raise your hand if you would like to testify this evening. Okay, thank you. Please go ahead, sir.
I'm Reverend Michael W. Combs, and I'm the pastor of the Mount Zion Baptist Church, and I too am concerned about safety and security, but I suggest to you that safety and security without some understanding of the possibility and the most likelihood of racial disparities does not really constitute security. I also suggest to you that in most instances, research suggests that unless race is a focal point, nothing is done. And from what I've heard and from reading the statement, there is no inclusion of making sure that racism and racial disparities do not exist or do not become a part of the program that you're putting in place. Another point I want to make is that when we speak of threat assessment, what threats are we talking about? What are we going to do to make sure that there are not racial disparities in threat assessments? And police officers, when they deal with African American males, studies suggest police officers become afraid. I've indicated this at another meeting. Police officers bring in mass murderers who use AR-15s they brought in alive, even though they've killed 17 people at a high school. Police officers brought in the gentleman who killed 4 persons at the Waffle House. That man was brought in alive. African-American males can't get home when they are unarmed. Something is happening within the relationship that exists between African Americans, males and females. And in 7th, 8th grade, young men began to take on the characteristics of becoming a man. And I'm very much afraid, that police officers are going to criminalize the behavior of African American males and females. And I understand that some of you might say, well, Lincoln is different. One thing I know about human beings, Lincoln is America. And we all are Americans. We know the story. We have lived the story. My experiences with police officers are not like those who talked about they used to be at Cane's restaurants. My experience is of police officers, and one of them that you named, that's going to be in the schools. He came into my home, and the whole time he talked to me, he had his hand on his pistol.
Thank you, sir.
That's aggressive behavior. Thank you very much.
Next testifier.
Good evening. My name is Jessica Shelburne. I'm the State Director for Americans for Prosperity of Nebraska. I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify this evening. Americans for Prosperity believes that economic freedom at the local, state, and federal level enables every American to pursue and achieve their American dream. Unfortunately, the policy that we are discussing before us tonight conflicts with our belief in limited government, sound fiscal policy, and individual liberty. For more than a year now, the people of this state, this county, and this city have been complaining about high property taxes. Yet, here we are discussing assessing another potential line item on property tax bills for the residents of Lincoln. With the 12th highest property tax per capita in the country, these tax burdens stifle our city and state's economic growth, population growth, and job creation and investment. But it doesn't stop there. While assessing a 1-cent tax per $100 of valuation, totaling $2 million in new taxes annually, this venture will be creating not one, but 2 new governing bodies. The proposed method for accomplishing the JPA's mission and purpose is a blatant mismanagement of taxpayer resources and represents a serious transparency issue for Lincoln residents with taxpayer dollars at stake. The revenue generated from the new tax will have to pay for the legal, financial, and administrative expenses of these new government entities. Despite taxpayers voting for the school board members, city council members, and the mayor, taxpayers will have no voice in voting for the representation of members on this nonprofit, or the JPA for that matter. Even though the JPA and nonprofit will be funded with their tax dollars. Why is it necessary to have 2 separate bodies to carry out the mission of the JPA? This is bureaucracy at its finest, needing a nonprofit board to advise and direct the JPA board, who is made up of members that have not been elected to guide either of our schools or our city. If we are not careful, this venture could quickly turn into a slush fund that will not produce the intended results. Lincoln residents cannot afford bigger government and higher taxes with little to no accountability to the taxpayer with no end in sight. There's no ending point for this JPA. As a parent with a student in LPS, there is nothing more important than keeping our children safe and secure. School security is paramount in helping to keep our children and all students safe while learning. But this can be accomplished without increasing taxes and expanding government bureaucracy. Lincoln can do better. We can help our students and children without creating needless government entities. Our organization urges the City Council to reject this proposal. We would be interested in the interlocal agreements. Thank you.
Good evening, Richard Halverson, 6311 Inverness Road. First, talking about safety. Parkland had a school resource officer. Columbine had a school resource officer. A couple other schools, not strike notorious, have had shootings. They've had school resource officers there too. and that didn't appear to help. The security is getting better in the schools. I used to do volunteer Red Cross training in the schools. It used to be you just walk right in. Now at least they check you at the door. So security is getting better. And I don't know if school resources are the answer or not. I know one of the other secondary functions they say is bond with them and create a different impression. I don't know if you remember DARE, drug assistance, drug abuse resistance. Well, that used to be everywhere. Well, then studies showed it didn't make a darn bit of difference on the use of drugs after they, as they grew older. They would bond with the cops, they'd be friendly with the cops, but once they reached a certain age, it didn't affect their drug use at all. So, again, I don't know if that part's going to work either. But as far as the JPA, there will be administrative cost. That was brought up at the school board meeting. And I say, I hate to think all the trees are going to be wasted. This is the meeting for the school board agenda. And if you have JPA, school, and advisory board, there are going to be administrative costs. And transparency. You mentioned that, gentleman. Yeah, it's going to be a public agency, open meeting, but like the Railroad Transportation Safety District, I would like to do a pop quiz. Well, I'm not going to do a pop quiz, but I bet if I did a pop quiz, you couldn't find 10 people in this room that know who sits on the Railroad Transportation Safety District. So there's not to say they are doing anything wrong or like that, but it's just the fact there's not a direct accountability when you have these separate agencies. And the last part, I guess, would be sequestration. I don't know if I'd be in favor of that either. So they're saying, well, the wheels could be falling off our fire trucks, bridges could be crumbling, but this is safe. Again, I say, yes, I think I'd be more in favor of Cindy Lamb's proposal. Yes, we can do this, but I would not be in favor of doing it through a JPA. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening. I'm Chris Beckenbaugh, 1501 Janus Court. I'm a lifelong Lincolnite, a mother and a grandmother. And here's what I appreciate about Lincoln. How safe Lincoln has been my entire life. It's a great place to live. And the good education that my husband and I received here, as well as our children, and that my grandchildren were receiving and participating in CLCs and other great programs in Lincoln Public Schools. But they have left Lincoln. Our daughter went looking to purchase her first home, this young family, and they looked at comparable homes in Lincoln that they could afford, and then they looked at comparable homes outside of Lincoln, and the property tax burden was just too high. It made these houses no longer comparable, and they have moved out of the district. The citizens of Lincoln chose you, each one of you on this board, and they trust you to do the work of decision-making for the city. We don't need a JPA. I'm disappointed that my grandchildren have moved away and they're no longer nearby. And they're no longer part of Lincoln Public Schools and participating in the great future that they could have had here. And they're getting an okay education in another part of the state, but it's not the same. They won't go to the same high school that my husband and I did. They're gone. And I don't see them coming back. What I do see is this city council abdicating its responsibility to take on this project and make these decisions. And I would encourage you to look for safety, not bureaucracy, and to work on the interlocal agreements that have worked so well here in Lincoln for such a long time. Just think about that tonight. Safety, not bureaucracy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Belinda Shepard. I am a former employee of Lincoln Public Schools, and I worked with the CLC department at Color Middle School. I would want you to please think about this CPA before you go, the JPA, before you go ahead and vote on this. I work directly with the resource officers there at the Lincoln North Star High School, and I know for my children of color and for some other children, it's not the way to go. I want you to think about it, think about the safety of our children, which is important, but again, I'm very concerned about our children of color, and I'm concerned about the contents that the JPA has, and I don't think it's the right solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Next testifier. It's coming up.
My name's Corey Raymond. I live at 3100 South 54th. I have 2 children in the public schools. I appreciate all these comments. I don't need to look at statistics to know that blacks are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. I'm in the courthouse every day over there. I can tell that just by walking in the courthouse. I don't need to see those statistics. And I suspect if we look at the statistics, the juvenile filings have went down and minorities are overrepresented, just like always. And as a criminal defense lawyer, for what, 50, 60, 70 years, we've been trying to figure out why. We've been trying to figure out what we can do to make that change. This group right here, who has some of the most important people in Lincoln, some of the most empathetic people got together to come up with this plan. And it's on the website, if y'all want to read that. The Malone Center was represented, El Centro. And if you look at, if you look at their priorities, reduce racial and ethnic disparity of youth in the juvenile justice system. They've been talking about this from Jump Street. And I hear about some of these concerns, and they're valid concerns. A lot of it has to do with schools jumping the gun or schools suspending too many minority students. I'm the last person to have a solution to this. I grew up on a farm south of here where the first black person I saw was when I was 12 years old, or, in a school. I came to Lincoln. So I'm the last person. But what I have a hard time understanding is, to me, I think we need more minorities in the police force. And I think that would help out a lot. And then when I hear talk about we don't want our kids around police officers, they're scared, they don't want to be around it. And then I think, what are the likelihood that these kids are going to grow up to be police officers if we're instituting that mentality in our minority students that police are bad? And I just think it's this circular thing. And I wish I had the answer, and I don't. I do know that Steve Joel and Jeff Bleimeister take this very serious. And I know that they look at the numbers every month. And they look at the racial minority, and they've put this plan together. And I also know that the chief of police is one of the most accessible public servants, for lack of a better way to put it, that I've ever ran across. And if students are being targeted because of their race, I know he'd sit down and speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next testifier. Again, we're using 2 mics. If somebody else wants to testify, please come forward.
Jane Kinsey with Watchdogs of Lincoln Government. We are the only organization or persons in this room who go to the JPA meetings. We have extensive experience with them. And I'll tell you, it is not public friendly. One of the cardinal rules of school systems in the United States is local control. A JPA will take local control away. The argument was heard, you can get grants. Grants have strings. That's not local control. In the first place, the whole idea was not transparent. Steve Joel himself said he and the mayor had been visiting about this for a long time. Also, the rumor is that Steve Joel wanted to get his community learning centers financed. This is a perfect opportunity for that to happen. So, let me tell you about actually going to a JPA. The agenda items often are not explicit. There's some kind of hidden idea, maybe financing, maybe something else behind it. So the public is allowed 5 minutes to speak to that when the knowledge ahead of time is very little. Also, sometimes there's a dollar amount on an item, and sometimes there isn't. So we are given 5 minutes as a public person to ask maybe 5 or 6 people who might have their fingers in that. Public money and the JPA is spent without public input or knowledge. Actually, the whole idea of the West Haymarket JPA was not given to the public at the time they voted for it. Someone has said that the JPA is long-term. Well, even the JPA for the West Haymarket has a time limit. It's on down the road, but it does have an end to it. The school board and the city also have lots of money. That's already been said. So we're not in favor of that. We're in favor of the idea, but not in the
Thank you. That's
idea.
your time.
Yes, I understand.
Okay.
So what I'm going to say as a last is this is a pig in a poke. It's a Trojan horse, and people need to be aware of what's inside the Trojan horse.
Is there anybody else who'd like to testify on these items? We have a staff rebuttal, and then we'll take staff questions.
This is not a rebuttal, and I'll be brief because I fear that one of you is going to ask if I know the members of the Railroad Transportation Safety District. Mr. Halverson is right. I don't think I can name all 6 of you. I just want to introduce a letter from State Senator Anna Wishart, who has written in support of the Safe and Secure Kids initiative. Please take a look at it when you have a moment.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Now it's our time for staff questions. Testimony is hereby closed for the public. Do we have questions for Chief Bleimmeister?
I do. Thank you. Chief, thanks for being here tonight. Appreciate it. We've had conversations about the school resource officers and threat assessment officers. And my understanding, and I understand what you said earlier, that it takes time to put those into place. But in visiting with us here in the last several weeks, you've indicated that there was a July class that we could add recruits to if funding and permission were granted, and that we may have officers that those wouldn't necessarily be the officers in the school. We'd be using more seasoned officers who are perhaps have more training in de-escalation and so forth. Can you just address that?
Absolutely, that is accurate, Cindy. And I want to take just an opportunity to, obviously there is a need and another chance for people in my profession, people in our agency to make a positive impact. And I hear what the people that are coming up here are saying, and disproportionality does exist. And I've said that in every public forum, and I can tell you that we take that very seriously. And we try from the onset, as to your point, Councilman Lamb, of trying to recruit, vet, train throughout their career. To Mr. Ryman's point, we do need more representation in our agency of females and of minorities. And the narratives, to shift the narratives, it's going to take time. And we're committed to it, and I just want to make sure people know that we're hearing their concerns and we're doing the best that we can to try to address that. And you're right, July 19th is the start of the new academy. The officers that we could hire, if provided approval through the mechanisms that we're discussing here today, could be implemented as soon as January of 2019. But we need to have that approval about 30 days in advance of the start of that class in order to know. Does that answer
It does, and also I just reassurances that it's not brand-new recruits that are trained that we're putting in these schools for SROs. It's seasoned officers who have experience in de-escalation techniques and have been trained and have a desire to work with kids in the middle schools.
Absolutely, that is accurate.
Thank you.
I only wanted to add to that I encourage people to take a look at the Memorandum of Understanding. It really does lay out a data collection process and evaluation. So if signs of disproportionate referral rates are occurring, it directs the police department and LPS. And I think that's an important consideration. We can't just take a look at the school resource officers. We have to take a look at Lincoln Public Schools personnel and how they're responding to those situations, because many, or if not most, of the referrals that come from an SRO school actually come from LPS staff. So it's a responsibility of the SROs and the LPS staff. We're going to measure the data, and we're going to react accordingly to make sure that we're adjusting to meet the situation as it occurs.
Okay, Benny and then John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Many of my questions have been answered. I just want to go back. I was at a meeting recently where there was a conversation about police contact with ethnic minorities, and I'd like you to, maybe I heard the number wrong, it was 97% of the time it's a referral from an instructor in the school system, and only about 3% of the time does the officer initiate contact. Did I get that number wrong?
Nope, that is correct. And so what the councilman's referring to is we've done two independent studies, one in 2013 and one with 2017 data, and it exclusively dealt with referrals, citations. One of the individuals here referred to, they're synonymous, coming from schools that have school resource officers. And so then we dove into those data, so we had someone look and read at every single one of those reports. And only 3% of the referrals came from some type of self-initiated activity. The majority came from, we're called by school staff, by victims of crime to respond, investigate, and I think that's another important component that Sarah Hoyle and Sarah's documents were placed up there. So there's also been studies done that show when the police are called, are they treating everyone the same as far as the enforcement actions? And that is something that I know that we can control, because we can't control who calls us. We can't control who's victims of crime, but we can control that we treat everyone, no matter what their race, their gender, with dignity and respect. And you have my commitment that that's what we will do.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
John?
Yes, thank you, thank you. The comments you just made, Chief, and I'm thinking of a number of the testifiers here on children of color and so forth. If we're getting these referrals from LPS, and along the line I was thinking we do more training, I think someone suggested, in fact, multicultural training, I think it was the pastor or whomever, regardless, is that the situation, or does some of this come from within LPS and these referrals they give, and almost that the SROs are passive? It was only 3%. I think there was a total of 250 referrals, you said, last year, I believe. So we're talking about 3% would be 7, 8 instigated by the SROs. So with that in LPS, how do you solve that? And then part of that, my question is too, does it really matter whether you have a JPA or an interlocal? Because as I understood you the other day at a session, you said that the SROs, regardless of the entity, will still be under LPD, under the Lincoln Police Department.
So to the second point, John, because actually that's the easier question to answer, is that is correct, that the management and oversight of the officers themselves, their policies, their practices, all of that will be maintained within the Lincoln Police Department. To the second point is a much more difficult and societal problem that for decades, for hundreds of years, we have been unable to solve. I can't sit here today and point fingers at the administration or the staff at Lincoln Public Schools, because they're calling us when crimes are reported to them, when victims come forward, or they're seeing incidents that they believe is criminal in nature. Now, when our officers respond, they do have that advanced training, and they try their best to use discretion, the appropriate discretion based upon the age. They have advanced training in cultural competency, but we are not perfect. And you won't hear me say that we are. But once again, we do our very best in partnership with LPS to work through the issues as they come forward. Because victims of a theft, of an assault, or of something far more serious, they have rights too. And those are rights that our agency is sworn to protect. And we aren't going to solve those deep issues with this JPA, but I also believe it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for kids that don't interact with our officers to do so at a younger level, to build those relationships, to know them as human beings. And so as they go throughout their life, that positive relationship will be something they can draw from if they need our services in more dire times.
But how does the JPA do anything more? I mean, we're talking about the substance here versus form. And again, with LPD being over the SROs and the training you do and so forth, it just seems natural that the substance is whatever form, whatever number of SROs we have is still within LPD's domain. And therefore, as you do your annual budget proposals to the administration and subsequently to the council, aren't you going to put those SROs, well, depending what comes out, but children's safety as a number one priority, or at least among the top priorities versus down the list?
Yeah, the overall safety and security of the entire community, including the children, is going to be our top priority, John. To the JPA's point, and this is my personal philosophical beliefs after living these experiences for a couple of months now and having the opportunity to be involved in discussions with citizens, with all of you, is this. It sends a message that the safety of our kids is no singular solution. There is no singular solution to that. The JPA incorporates all of these things: school resource officers, threat assessment, behavioral and mental health, community learning centers, into one particular package. It's set out, it has parameters, and it's taken action. And it's showing the members of our community that we are going to do something, that we aren't going to just sit and talk, that we're going to take action that's going to improve the overall security of our community. And so that is why the JPA is different.
Okay. Jane.
Chief Bleimeister, I know we heard testimony from several families that are concerned about young people of color and how they're treated. I know Mrs. Keys talked about her son who was a senior and how he had a referral. Can you walk us through the process of how that SRO gets involved? So, for example, if we don't know a lot of the details, but if the school authorities identified the situation happening, does the SRO step in from the beginning, or where does an SRO get involved? Because it was clear from that story and probably other stories that we have not heard that type of relationship and relationship development wasn't what it needed to be for those kids of color.
I can't speak to the specific details as you've mentioned, Jane, but here is a typical situation. If there's a theft that occurs at Lincoln Northeast High School, a theft is a crime. Someone is taking someone's property. Now, there are varying levels of that particular offense. And so in something like that, the victim would either contact a trusted administrator, staff, who's going to contact us because it's a crime that occurred on that campus. We would come forward, and just like if you're dialing 441-6000 or 911, our officers are going to respond, and we're going to do our best to investigate who is culpable for that particular offense. Now, that's when we start talking about discretion, and discretion has so many good things. But we also have to remember that when there's discretion, there is an opportunity for disparate treatment. And that's why we work so hard through our vetting and training processes to make sure that we still treat that case the same no matter who is the victim, no matter who is the person responsible.
Okay.
So I guess my concern is that common practice for who would issue that referral or that citation for an individual who refuses to provide testimony or
Refusing to provide testimony is not an offense. It's something like that. Now, theft is an offense. I don't know the particular details on this, and to comment on it, I think would be hard in these circumstances. But we have to establish what sufficient means to, would a reasonable person believe that someone has committed this offense? And then a citation or referral, again, the terms are synonymous, would be referred in this case to the city attorney's office.
Okay, I was just concerned that as we deal with this issue going forward, how do we provide assurances to those families that have these concerns? And how do we address them going forward in making sure any additional SROs have the proper training to be able to provide that discretion?
We've talked a lot today, and I can certainly delineate the training that our officers receive. Mr. Hoppy spoke to the MOU, which is an additional step on top of that. And we are dedicated, so there's measures in place. If someone reports a crime, if action is taken, the city attorney's office is seeing that. The supervision within that officer, for that officer, is seeing that. And if there are problematic practices, hopefully they're being addressed. And if they're not, then the Lincoln Police Department is very versed in taking complaints and investigating those complaints thoroughly. And if people don't feel comfortable that we're going to investigate ourselves like we should, then we have the Citizens Police Advisory Board. And again, that's just another layer of transparency and of accountability.
Carl. Thank you. So there are these silos, and LPD has your responsibility in terms of enforcing the law. LPS has their responsibility in terms of enforcing student discipline. But you're in the same building, and you're working with the same kids. And it seems to me, whereas you have your separate responsibilities, there's also this common goal that we have to work with kids, to be a positive influence with the kids, to help them, if they've messed up, find a way to do better. How can you work with LPS in terms of respecting those differences that you have?
The MOU tries to spell out this clear delineation, separation between what is a disciplinary matter within the school and what is a criminal violation. But I can tell you, Carl, just like what you're saying, is that there's so much overlap, there is gray. And so we have to constantly be evaluating, were these actions correct? And one of the ways that we do that is we have scheduled here coming up before the beginning of the next school year to sit down with the administrators from the building, with staff from LPS, and to look at some of the specific examples of where these lines are kind of blurred and say, can we do better? Should have we taken a different action on this particular incident? And maybe the one that was referenced here today would be one we could review. And I think that they've left.
She's gone.
Okay. Yeah. Because I was hopeful to be able to take a look at that particular case and know some of the facts and circumstances. I don't know if that's answering your question, but.
Okay. Other staff questions? John.
I'd like our city attorney to come forward, and maybe Mr. Sechrest as well. It's a legal question, and fairly straightforward, as you gentlemen are coming. We've heard several times that JPA is subject to Open Meetings Act. I've heard other sources say no, it isn't. And then secondly, the nonprofit corporation that is part of this measure, is that subject to open meetings?
And I'd open records too, add that to the mix.
Jeff Kirkpatrick, City Attorney. The JPA is a public body, and so it is clearly covered by the public meeting law. Anything that applies to this meeting, as far as having to announce that, as far as having to have an agenda out, all of those particulars under state law would apply to a JPA, which is a public entity. As to the nonprofit, that is, I think, a little bit of a gray area, except for the fact that if you provide in the bylaws of the nonprofit that it has to follow the Public the open meetings law, then it would have to follow the terms of the bylaws. Similar to what we did with the MSOA, which I know some of you are familiar with, that oversees and regulates the ambulance service in Lancaster County. That is a nonprofit corporation that was formed by the city, and in its bylaws, it's required to have all of its meetings follow the public meeting law of the state of Nebraska. As to the open records law, our research indicates not only would the JPA, obviously as a public entity, have to follow that law, but the nonprofit corporation, because of its funding source and because of its public purpose, would also have to follow the open records law in the same way that JPA would, or the same way that the city council does.
Okay.
I concur with his answer.
Okay. Other staff questions? Cindy, then Jane?
Before you sit down, thank you. So I'm a little confused about the, because of its funding. Because when I asked the question the other day at our work session, I was told that the nonprofit, they didn't even know if it would have its own bank account.
Right.
And so, as far as funding, I did read in the JPA that the city and the LPS would share in the cost of forming the nonprofit, and then that would be potentially reimbursed by the JPA. But I still have not gotten a clear answer on what happens to the other $5 million or so that's currently the funding source for CLCs. Who handles that?
Yeah.
Because I'm reading that the nonprofit is simply being established in order to coordinate those funds and advise the JPA. So if we don't have a JPA, it doesn't need to advise the JPA, but it could still, the city could still be at the table of a nonprofit, correct?
You are correct in that if you did an interlocal, you could still have the nonprofit corporation help coordinate. As far as the current funding, the totality is about $7 million. About $2 million is the share from the city and Lincoln Public Schools. The rest of that money is the nonprofit, the funders or the lead agency's money. And they minister the program themselves at the sites. They hire the staff that runs it, both from an administrative point of view, but more importantly on site. They bring the resources, the paper, the pens, whatever the activities are, and funds it. So their money stays with them. Some of the money is grant money that comes through the Lincoln Public Schools or comes through the Lincoln Community Foundation, and then they in turn administer that money maybe to one of the lead agencies to operate CLC. So that money again should stay with the Community Foundation and not have to come in to the nonprofit.
Can you give us an estimate of cost for setting up the nonprofit and keeping it running?
Oh, to keep it running just from a legal point of view?
How about just setting it up?
You know, I'd volunteer myself to set it up if that was the issue. I don't think it's a minimal expense to draft bylaws and file the articles. That's, you know, that effort is not a big expense at all.
And so that leads me to the question of if it's a minimal expense. 4 years ago, the CLCs were urged to organize in this type of an entity, and it hasn't been done. Why would the city and LPS have to fund putting that together after these years if it's minimal? Why wasn't it just done?
Why wasn't it done? Again, part of that plan you're talking about that was done a couple years ago that talks about the organization, talked about it increasing and finding a more stable, sustained funding source too, of which that is in front of you. So rather than do parts, the effort was let's bring a totality package that not only would have a JPA, not only have the JPA agreement, but also show you the bylaws, the articles, and things of that nature. So it could have been done, but I think they decided to wait and try to work on the sustainable funding because at the end of the day, that's probably the most important.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jane?
And continuing with that theme of sustainable funds, how would a interlocal be structured to create that sustainable fund without setting aside the taxing authority to do so? How many years contractually can an interlocal establish without having to look to bonding authority? Is there a minimum, or, for example, a 2-year budget? Is that reasonable, or how would you approach something like that?
Well, I will let Jeff talk about legality, because sometimes we hear 2 years, sometimes we hear 4 years, restrictions. But it could be done in a contractual way. But again, it's not easy. And again, I don't think your city attorneys are going to be excited to see you contract it away, except through a JPA type model, but they can speak for themselves. Otherwise, you can, again, a flavor of ice cream, you could do a yearly interlocal and then have each side bring the money to the table through their normal budget process, or you could have and try to commit a specific dollar amount for a really long period of time. But I think you'll discover that that's got some risk to it as well.
Okay, Carl?
I didn't.
I don't think,
Just briefly.
To talk about the longevity of an interlocal. We have lots of interlocals.
We have lots of interlocals, and I think what that points to is the variety of approaches. For example, we have a number of interlocals that are essentially for 1 year, but automatically renew unless some of the parties to the interlocal want to make a change. So that would be one model. And there are, as I think Mr. Seacrest has alluded to several times, there are a lot of different models. And part of the complication that I think you could also address at great length is it would be one thing if we had direction from the council or from the mayor, go ahead and draft an interlocal and let's see what you got. But we can't, from the standpoint of there's two parties here. And so part of the reason why we have, I think, a JPA is there's that cooperation, negotiation between the LPS and the city. If you're going to do an interlocal, you basically have to do the same thing, except you've got a lot more things to choose from in that regard.
Are there any other models that you have a 2-year commitment or a 3-year commitment besides that automatic renewal should, unless both parties make a notification?
Well, I think if both parties wanted to do it, you could do a 2-year or a 3-year commitment. That's certainly something that interlocals have been done around.
Are you, just a question, are you familiar with the interlocal agreement that establishes the Career Academy that's for a 50-year agreement between the Southeast Community College and Lincoln Public Schools?
No, I wasn't involved in that and haven't had a chance to review that.
Okay.
If I could just make a comment.
If I could too, I'm sorry, but it seems to me we have interlocals for shared space at a couple of the recreation facilities with LPS in particular. They were drafted, put into place back in 1987, and they're good until 2030. So I think we have a history of long-term, and also we're involved in the interlocal for the zoo school, I believe, on a long-term basis also. So it's not that it's unheard of. It's certainly something we can do.
I just wanted to comment quickly on Chris Connolly's City Law Department. One of the things I wanted to comment on was the problem with interlocals, as we see it from the Law Department, is it kind of restricts our ability the city's ability to manage the budget. When you have this line item that would be put in, that would be a commitment for a long period of time, and you're right, there's plenty of very long-term interlocal agreements that we're part of. When you do that, then it may end up affecting the ability of other line items in the budget to be fully funded. In other words, if you get into a downtime, you're committed to sending this money to the interlocal for this purpose or any of the other purposes for interlocals. And it may affect or reduce some of the other items that you want to be able to fund and reduce that. Whereas with the JPA, you have that sole source, you've given up a penny to the JPA, and it's up to the JPA to monitor and to set that budget, which it has to do on an annual basis, and file its budget with the state, in fact. You have more transparency there with the way the budget is developed, and there's less stress on the way the city budget is managed. So I wanted to
But wouldn't that lead to an increased city budget if you're stressed out?
In terms of the JPA, you only have the 1 cent, so that's the maximum. Currently.
Is what's being proposed, but.
And that's in the agreement that it would only be the 1 cent.
Yeah. I was going to recognize Carl. No?
Question was answered.
Okay. Benny?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to go back to Mr. Seacrest if just for a moment. The city's contribution and Lincoln Public Schools' contribution is not the entire contribution to this program, right?
No.
What would if the JPA were passed and a 1 cent tax was levied and $2 million was raised, how much of that would be part of, can you give me a percentage of the entire?
You're asking a dyslexic person to remember facts and
yeah,
figures.
I did a horrible job asking the question too, so.
Several months ago, when I last looked at this, LPS, or the city was going to be about 34%, and LPS was like 32%, and then the private sector made up the balance.
About another third from the private sector.
If you brought $2 million new to the table.
Thank you.
Okay. Other staff questions? Larry?
Could you please speak to the level of coordination that exists today between the City of Lincoln, LPS, and the nonprofits? Could you paint a picture for us of what that looks like?
Well, when this first started, it was a mechanism which was the mayor, the superintendent, and then in the original day it was the newspaper publisher. Since then, Barb Bartles of Lincoln Community Foundation has taken over the newspaper's third leg.
Can you pull that mic closer to you?
Yeah,
Sorry, it's really
I'm
hard to hear you.
As a result, what we have today is very similar to what we started with, and it's these three individuals try to monitor and supervise something that's really grown. We started out originally a handful of sites, and we're up to 26, and everybody wants us to go to 31 and possibly go above that. So we have felt the need to do even a better job of trying to bring accountability, success, coordination to it, and not just rely on a mayor, a superintendent, and one other private sector individual.
Okay. Other staff questions? Carl, Jimmy, John. I was looking at John and Carl.
Lynn Johnson, please.
Good evening.
Yes. Earlier, when you gave us the initial layout, you talked about the $607,000 currently budgeted in the current fiscal year by the Parks and Rec for CLCs, and that with the cost increases and so forth, and this is net of user fees, that it would go to about $620,000. Why would you not, in your parks budget, if this is so important, why wouldn't you put that as a very high priority anyway?
It is a high priority, and through the city's prioritization process, the CLC initiative is part of the safety and security budget outcome area, so it is a high priority. So when we present it, it is identified as one of our top priorities. Obviously, we don't get to make that decision, though. It's really a decision that the city council and the mayor make about what ultimately is funded. Within our budget, that means that the Community Learning Center initiative and the funding for that competes with things like neighborhood swimming pools and park mowing and our capital improvement program, all areas that we struggle to keep funded every year. On a broader basis, then we look at things like libraries and aging services, and there are a number of lower priority items that have to compete for funding every year.
So, and I think it gets down to priorities. You know, I've been saying that for years, that we as legislative bodies need to prioritize. There are so many good programs out there. I think Jeff Cole, when he testified in support of the JPA, but he also talked about giving these the priority, and there was a fear that in the individual city or LPS bodies that they wouldn't do this. And it really concerns me that if we on the city side or LPS on its side don't put this type of an intangible program at a high priority in our budgets, that we need to artificially create this JPA to force us to do it or give away a taxing amount, that really concerns me, that we don't have enough self-discipline to do that. I think it speaks very poorly of us if that's one of the reasons to go to a JPA.
I have a question to kind of
Please.
follow up on what's being discussed here. It's my understanding that if the JPA is formed, that approximately $600,000 that the city is spending on those CLCs right now will come back into the city's general fund? Is
It
that
will,
correct?
Correct.
Why would we do that? Why would we not leave it there and allow it to continue doing the good work it's doing now?
I think what it does is that it takes that funding and it puts it in a place where it is dedicated on an ongoing basis.
But this would be essentially new money back into the city budget that we would have in the general fund, but we've been spending it consistently on CLCs. So why not leave it in there and spend it on CLCs continuously and use the money for, the CLC will generate, excuse me, the JPA would generate to augment that?
I think really, as I said, the intent was to get the city's participation in the CLC initiative into a stable funding situation.
So the 600, so what I just heard you say essentially is the $600,000 that will be coming back to the city that we're spending on CLCs right now is not stable.
That funding would be stable. The expenditures that the city is making, it competes within the overall budget process, I think, as everybody knows, every year, and there's no assurance from a year-to-year basis that is going to get funded.
But again, the question is, why don't we just leave it in the CLCs and augment the CLC program with the JPA money?
It's a good question.
Okay. All right. I'll get an answer from the Chief of Staff.
I think Mr. Johnson answered the question, which is funding stability. You have no guarantees that that's going to survive year to year. Programming is based on what happens the year before. The success of programming is being able to show long-term success, to have the data to go to funders and say to them, this is the results we are achieving. That is an issue when you're subject to a biennial budget process, where, as Mr. Johnson said, that money is competing with other priorities. If it sits in another budget and that budgeting is guaranteed and assured, then you have a much stronger foundation to seek other funding to supplement that funding.
So how long have we been putting $600,000 a year into CLCs?
It's gradually increased over a period of years. The city has been
And
involved
we
with
used, and we, during the 09 recession, took quite a bit out of community learning centers at that point. So if the question is, have they remained stable the whole time? No, our own history demonstrates that it has not.
And there are some other gaps that if that $600,000 came from the JPA to the general fund, there are some other gaps that could be funded with that. For example, I think the council knows.
It goes back to John's question about
Priorities.
prioritization. And what I'm hearing is JPA is great, CLCs are great, but not to the tune of continuing to fund them for $600,000 plus the 1 cent.
Are you asking a question or making a statement?
Making a statement here.
Okay. That's
And I
what
want to
sure.
be clear that I think that this is a raw deal for the CLCs and for Lincoln Public Schools, for example, because they end up paying most of what's going into here, because we're not collecting that 1 cent right now.
Well, I'm not sure how it's a raw deal for the CLCs to have a dedicated funding source.
But you're taking away $600,000.
No, we're ensuring $600,000 goes into the CLCs.
Right, and then you take away $600,000. You could leave it all, you could leave that $600,000, could you not leave that $600,000 in there and still spend the $2 million that's being projected to be earned by that 1 cent?
So you want to spend $2.6 million on the initiative?
I'm asking you how important it is.
No, but I'm trying to understand your question. You're saying that we're shorting the CLCs with the $600,000. That's not correct.
Could we not spend $2.6 million? Well,
of course, if you chose to do that, and if you'd like to give the CLCs more levy authority.
Why we have not done that?
Why we've not gone to $2.6 million?
Right, why are we taking the money out instead of leaving it in?
Again, I think we've answered the question, Mr. Chair. I think we've suggested to you that it is more stable and thus more attractive to funders to have an independent funding source for the CLCs rather than to worry about the biennial budget process for that money or the year-to-year budget process of the Lincoln Public Schools.
Okay, I don't accept your answer, but Larry, it's up to her.
I mean, let's be real. The number one priority of the budget is public safety. It gets more than 50% of the general fund dollars. So anything that's in the general fund bucket, that is our number one priority, as it should be. And as a parks advocate, I'm very aware of how often budget dollars up for consideration for parks expenses are on the chopping blocks when we have tough economic times. So I guess my question is, Lynn, how long have you been the Parks Director?
18 years.
Do you have any information with you about your overall budget over time and its ebbs and flows, its dips and valleys based on economic times? Can you have any information with you, or can you summarize it?
I certainly can try to summarize it.
It's
Yeah.
FTEs, total dollars, other measures that you can speak to the growth or lack thereof in your department.
We have a report that I can certainly share with the council that shows the reduction in FTEs over time. That, as you said, when there are challenging economic times, the impact on the park, we are the largest general fund budget outside of public safety. And so when there is a reduction to be made, it typically has impacted Parks and Recreation. So we've obviously done a number of things, like we've prioritized where we mow. A few years ago, we prioritized where we provided before and after school services. We have at times completely eliminated general fund revenue or general fund support for our capital improvement program, and so we've deferred maintenance or deferred repair and replacement program for a number of years. I can provide the information about kind of the ebb and flow of FTEs over time, but things like our mowing practices, we've stretched the number of days between our mowing cycle, and then we've reduced mowing. And those kind of things, they never come back.
Your forestry and tree trimming?
Yeah, you're right. Our
Hear about that.
Yeah, our pruning cycle right now, we're touching about 3% of the trees on an annual basis when we should be touching about 10% of our trees on an annual basis. Mm-hmm. And that's an impact of a growing population of public trees and a static population of arborists.
So is it fair to say that there's more uncertainty about the probability of your department getting funds than, say, the police department or public works, and therefore CLCs being a part of your budget are also kind of in a state of greater uncertainty than other services might be in the city budget?
I think that's true. The council knows that the entire city budget is prioritized among 8 outcome areas. Public safety, including CLCs, are part of safety and security. CLCs are a lower priority than officers on the street. Much of the rest of what Parks and Recreation does is in lower priority areas, is in livable neighborhoods, is in healthy and productive people, is in environmental protection, is in Identity Lincoln, much lower priority areas. Most of our Tier 3 programs have gone away over the last 8 years. We're down to very few programs, and I can tell you when we look at a budget, it's a challenge every year. Neighborhood pools, which it should never happen because it really is a place where kids are in a safe, secure environment during the summer. We are at the point where neighborhood pools is at the bottom of our priority list right now.
So I have a follow-up question then on this.
I'm not quite done, sorry. I'd like to finish.
It's the
I'd like
same
to finish my
subject.
question,
You
Mr. Chair.
finish, and then I'll go ahead.
Thank you.
Okay.
So it seems to me that the point that is being made is that if you set aside CLCs outside of your general fund budget through JPA, then when we hit tough economic times, mowing and funds for Emerald Ash Borer and trees, forestry management in the city and pools, all of those things are still subject to being on the chopping block, but this wouldn't be because it's not in your budget anymore. It's being paid for somewhere else, even if it's being reimbursed to have you implement the services at your rec center. Isn't that really the difference?
That is the difference, yes.
Maybe we should put all of parks in the JPA. I might be in favor of that.
Ms. Gaylor, may I follow up on that point as well? I think you're hitting the nail on the head in terms of, despite the efforts of the JPA to take some of that pressure off the programs that Lynn is still talking about, that pressure is still going to exist in the form of public safety. When we first came here as an administration, the amount of the general fund budget going to public safety was in the high 40s. I think it was 47 or 48%. That number is now 54%. It has steadily crept up even as we've added more police officers and had to reduce other staff, or even when we've kept police officers and firefighters fairly static, that percentage has continued to increase. So I don't think we're locking in the type of programs that Mr. Johnson is talking about. We're just giving a little less competition because we have great competition already on the public safety side for those very services.
Okay, so
But that's
the
the
question.
pension plan that's caused that increase, our underfunding. We've gone from $500,000 to $1 million.
No. That is certainly part of it, but that is not the entire thing. That is certainly the increased cost of providing it.
Back to the JPA.
Correct.
It is my understanding that under the JPA, organization, the funding, that we're not really actually creating any new CLCs with the $2 million the JPA would receive. Is that correct?
The JPA board could make that decision, whether to deepen the programming or whether to expand.
But the proposal that I've read on the JPA says we're just going to reinforce the administrative staff to help cover these CLCs. Is that correct?
It's a combination of two. There is $220,000 about that would go to bolster and support kind of the oversight and coordination piece. That allows the initiative to grow over time. There's the remaining about $400,000 that could be used to either deepen programming, provide scholarships, or that money could be used to expand the CLC initiative.
So if the city were to continue to fund independently $600,000 that it's currently sending over to the CLCs, if we were to continue to do that, that would actually allow for creation of new CLCs in Title I schools that don't have them now, correct?
That is a possibility, yes.
Okay. John?
Some simple math here, as I understand it, if the JPA is set up, that the first 620,000 comes back to the city, and now the JPA handles that which you and Parks and Rec have done.
Correct.
So are you going to lower your budget 620,000?
That's really up to the budget process, to be perfectly honest. I could certainly tell you where I would like to use that money. For example,
yeah, and that's the problem. It's called tax creep here that several people talked about. That really then putting in the JPA, you say you've got that with the 1 cent mill levy, but over here you're going to use that. You're going to say, well, gee, I had that 600,000 last year, so now I'm going to do it for X, Y, and Z and ABC. So we've got a $600,000 tax increase.
Not necessarily.
I don't think it's tax creep because we wouldn't use it to implement new programs. We would use it to support
But it's
existing at this
$600,000
point.
being spent that you gave there, and now you get it, and so now you're going to go ahead and spend it anyway.
It frees up a line item, but I stood before this council at the work session and said this administration would offer a budget that was a half-cent levy lower than the previous year. LPS is still going through their process. They are aiming to do the same thing, and thus it becomes levy neutral, and where the 600,000 goes isn't relevant to that part of the discussion. I mean, you're not having that tax creep that you're mentioning.
But for the first year, is what you said.
But for the first year, and I got to tell you, I found that to be the biggest red herring in the entire discussion tonight. It's been an excellent discussion except for that. If the JPA didn't exist, there's nothing to prevent the city council or the school board from raising the levy the very next year. You're looking for a guarantee that means nothing. They always have that option whether the JPA exists or not.
Okay. Other questions? Cindy?
Thank you. I'd like to return just for a minute to the levy neutral part. So we're going to be preparing a 2-year budget at this point in time and in August. And so is the administration prepared to offer a budget that would be reduced by that ½ cent levy for both years?
I don't know about the second year in terms of what we face yet, and I think you'd want me to hear all that before you made that commitment. That said, I told you that we would offer a levy that was a ½ cent lower, and we intend to do that.
Okay, and in the event that the school district will not reduce its levy or does not reduce its levy this year or does not next year, are we prepared for the city to lower our levy that additional ½ % to ensure that it's levy neutral?
That's up to you as much as it's up to me. I mean, you'd have to make the decision that yes, you wanted to go that direction, A, B, that you wanted to forego any money from the Emerald Ash Borer crisis, that you didn't want to address the $1.5 million deficit in sidewalks or any of the other issues that are coming up. In short, LPS has a responsibility here as well, Ms. Lamb.
Well, let's be real. The mayor's budget is the budget. We learned that. I mean, we got sued to make sure we learned it. The mayor's budget. What I'm asking is the mayor's office committed to provide us with 2 years that'll make sure
The
this is
budget we
levy
will
neutral.
introduce for 2018, 2020, and this is the third or fourth time I've said it publicly, will have a levy that's a ½ cent lower.
For each year.
Yes.
Thank you. But will it do the 1 cent if Lincoln Public
Again,
Schools?
until we know more about what LPS is doing and what we are doing, that's not a commitment I can make. But LPS's intent was to match us to do that.
Okay. but we're not committing to it. So, because to me, it looks like the city's getting back $1 million kickback right off the top of the JPA anyway. And so why wouldn't we have just said, we'll give the JPA up to a half a cent and go ahead and continue making our contribution to CLCs, and then we're going to be also adding SROs. We have the money to do that through the increased valuations. Why wouldn't we just say half a cent into the JPA and let the school district make that levy neutral if we're going to get the $1 million back anyway?
I'm sorry, I completely could not follow that. If you're asking me a question, I don't know how to respond to that. Please help me understand what you're asking.
Sure. So the city gets a kickback of $600,000 right
Okay, I
off the
object
top.
to the term kickback for starters, but $600,000 is returned to the city budget from the JPA for the CLCs, yes?
Right. And the SROs would be funded, the city's portion of the SROs would also come back to the city from the JPA.
I thought, I'm
$400,000.
going to have to look at my attorneys. I thought the JPAs was funding that directly. Or is it a reimbursement? The JPAs are funding that directly.
City.
Well, but we could have, but we pay the officers,
Yes,
and so they'll pay us for our officers,
Okay.
instead of us spending the money.
Correct.
okay.
So we could just spend the money out of what we have. We could spend the $1 million and not have to have it come back to us from this JPA. That's
We
all.
did an analysis on this, and it's about $500,000 more expensive for the city to go the interlocal route than it is the JPA route.
Well, I'd like to see the notes on that you guys
You bet.
took
I'd
on
be
that.
happy to put it together for you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Other staff questions? Lyrian?
I'd like to ask Chief Leimeister a question.
My apologies, I am paying attention, but I'm trying to answer school board members' questions at the other meeting via text.
So we've also heard that that the payment for SROs begins the day that they would be walking in the door of schools. Yet there is considerable investment going into getting those officers trained in the academy, trained and ready. Even if it's not the new officers that then go to the schools, we have to have new officers to provide coverage elsewhere in the city to allow other officers to become SROs. Can you just help us understand what kind of dollar investment it takes to get officers ready to walk through the doors of a school to fulfill the role of an SRO? What kind of money does that require and capital?
So the training process, beginning with the academy and through the field training phase, is approximately, it's just under a year. So we'll use a year for discussion purposes. I'm going to say that dollar amount is approximately $65,000 per officer, and that includes wages and benefits. But I also, and I'm going to make sure I've got this right because this has been a evolving document, that LPS, as part of this JPA agreement, has said that they will provide the 35% subsidy from the beginning. That's correct?
I don't think so.
No?
Nope. Okay.
Please repeat what she just said.
So LPS has agreed to provide the costs for the threat assessment officer for one of the 7 throughout the entirety of the process. So from the moment they're hired, is that correct?
Pierce from the mayor's office. For the SROs, it's once the SROs are in the schools, which my understanding is that's how you handle the high school SRO officers. That's when LPS starts committing their 35% share. For the threat assessment officer, they've indicated once the officer, he or she is identified, when he or she begins training, that's when they will begin their 35% share.
Okay. My apologies, I was incorrect in my...
I have a follow-up. Yeah, I have a follow-up question for that. Thank you. So I had an amendment drawn up by law in order to release funding for the training of the 7 officers, the 7 new recruits, let's call them, because they may not end up being the actual SROs that are in the schools, whatever. And the training costs, they go through a 12-week training, and so the cost that was estimated before we actually have a new budget in place was about $28,609. And I believe that the law department checked that with you. Is that right? or with your office, maybe?
Yeah, I'm sure that they did. I'm looking at a draft, one of the drafts of this
Okay.
particular document. And Cindy, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding your question correctly. You're saying that the cost of training an officer in the academy is about $28,000. Is that correct?
Or, my understanding is the training costs are lower.
That is correct. That is
That-
accurate.
Yeah, and that during the training period between the July class beginning and our budget would be about $28,000 in immediate funds you'd need to get them started in July.
And that number is based upon 6, correct?
No, that, that number is actually based upon 7. I got the number through the finance department. And so essentially what that $28,000 approximately represents is 3 months of payment for 7 recruits.
Okay.
And of course, part of that, the reason why it seems relatively low is they're not eligible for a pension at that point. So when you look at the benefit package, that's a portion of the benefit package that's not available for new recruits.
Okay. Thank you, but that would cover what we're talking about.
That would cover 7 officers for those 3 months as they begin the training academy
In
until
July.
the end of the fiscal year, which is August 31st.
Okay, thank you.
But I know that we had talked about additional cruisers, we had talked about additional equipment for each one of the officers to have. Is that included in that amount?
No, that's just the
salaries.
The people, the salaries.
The people
The
only.
concern was, you wanted to have them, this is Councilwoman Lamb's concern, if you tried to make sure that you had those 7 new officers available for the training academy starting in July, where's the money coming from? And so those folks you're not providing a cruiser for because they're just being trained at that point for the first 3 months, for example.
And that is accurate. We would not need.
Then we
cruisers.
catch up with it with the budget.
Exactly. You
Okay.
put that money in the budget.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for staff? Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for waiting around. Okay, so now we need to go over there's some of these that are scheduled to be voted on this evening, correct, Teresa? Okay, which one, let's identify those right now.
18R87, 18R88, and 18R89.
I'd like to move that we delay these items to keep them as a package we've had a special public hearing on these items.
Second?
It's moved by Larry and seconded by Jane. Discussion.
These are all related matters, and rather than take a
Right.
vote on some of them tonight, I move that we delay until next week when we have action on the
Cindy.
others.
Thank you. These really aren't intertwined. One is not necessarily exclusive of the other, and I would very strongly urge my colleagues not to delay the vote on these 3 items. And even tonight, we've heard discussion that strengthens my resolve in this. We've heard from Mr. Kirkpatrick that in order to, well, first of all, let me talk about what the 3 are. One is asking the city staff to add and negotiate to add 6 more SROs and the threat assessment officer, and that will take a little time. But the funding is another one that funds the $28,000 for their training, and that needs to happen right away, and that shows a commitment to these parents that are concerned that we're going to take this particular action, whether or not the Lincoln Public Schools votes on this. The third part is which is actually the second one we'll be voting on, is the urging the city staff to negotiate and draft a interlocal agreement. Now, it's not accepting the interlocal agreement or voting to approve an interlocal agreement. It's saying draft one. And Mr. Kirkpatrick indicated to us that they would want direction from the mayor or the city council to go ahead and draft that so we can look at them side by side. I don't think waiting isn't appropriate. And I know that the councilwoman said that she and the president of the school board talked about doing that, but even as we didn't get an email till 4:47 this afternoon, and even as early as today when I talked to school board members, that was nowhere in the discussion. We need to put this out there to show our commitment to it, to draft a resolution, and that resolution, or excuse me, an interlocal of some sort that we can look at side by side. And I've heard from several school board members, that would be a good thing, to look at them side by side, see what's in them, and I think we do need to have our staff involved in drafting those. Voting on these tonight gives us a couple opportunities. Certainly, we have an opportunity to commit to the public and to Lincoln Public Schools that we're going to take some action. We're going to take action on this. We're going to take action to draft an interlocal so that we all are comparing the two items together. We're going to take action to make sure that we have the funds available to get those officers trained, and we're going to take action to expand the current interlocal, which has to be expanded anyway if we're going to, add the SROs. And in fact, one of the testifiers tonight talked about we don't have a base, a bottom for how many SROs or how much protective in the JPA needs to be committed. We also in the JPA don't have any commitment for, any assured commitment for how much will go for mental health. What we only have is we have 40% as the floor, and the sky's the limit, or the 2 million is the limit for the CLCs. We have 30% or less, which means as low as 0 for the protective portion, or SROs and threat assessment officer, and we have nothing addressing an assured amount or dedicated amount for mental health. We need to work on that. My third piece, 18R88, directs the staff to negotiate and draft an interlocal agreement with LPS to memorialize the current level of city participation and funding for the community learning centers, along with a plan for expanding the programs to include all Title I schools in the district, that the agreement shall include the city's commitment to share in the funding of expanded behavioral health services in the public schools for the same period. So it covers CLCs, and I know there's been some talk out there or some letters that said maybe it didn't, but it does. This covers that, directs the staff to draft what we need to see before a decision is made. And so I would just urge my colleagues, don't be afraid to vote on this. I know I asked, why don't you want to vote on the, why do you want to delay it? And I was told by Councilwoman Larian Baird, I don't want to vote on it tonight. Okay, that's not good enough. So I think that it's time to step up, show our commitment in these areas, and vote on this. And I would just urge my colleagues to do that and show the citizens and the LPS that we are dedicated to this.
Jane, then Lyrian.
Well, this evening, I heard a lot of concern from many of those that testified with the SROs. And so I, for one, am not prepared at this point in time to go ahead and trigger that until we have approved a memorandum of understanding that addresses some of the concerns that have been identified this evening and gives the assurances to the parents out there that have these real legitimate concerns that they will be addressed going forward from henceforth. And I see it's my understanding that, we would like to see more SROs, but I would feel much more comfortable if we would memorialize the memorandum of understanding and make sure that we have been as comprehensive in including all the elements that need to be included in the memorandum of understanding. I would like to move forward with the SROs, but it's my understanding on that item as well that we have at least a month until we give a firm commitment of hiring so that we will be in time to get that July 1 recruitment class on board. So I don't see the urgency of taking action tonight. I know I, for one, would love to go and join and listen to the testimony that's being provided at Lincoln Public Schools, because that's a big component of all of this. And I don't see what a delay what harm it causes, because there are so many moving parts from our participation to Lincoln Public Schools. So I would support a delay.
Lyrian?
Yeah, so I appreciate the passion that everyone feels about this proposal to try and promote safety and partnership in our community, and that I'm trying to keep that as my North Star. I think it's really exciting that we have had so many productive discussions, and Again, these are related matters. We're looking at a multifaceted approach, and to kind of divide some and try and vote on them tonight just doesn't seem that logical to me, for the reasons Jane stated. Also, I mean, the 18R 88 calling for negotiations isn't an actual plan, it's a request. And so I think what I tried to make clear earlier tonight was that I've made that request to try and have an actual document. We do not have that actual document just because this is on our agenda, and any one of us can ask City Law to prepare those kinds of documents. The school board leadership can ask their lawyers to make those kinds of documents and give that direction. That direction has now been given. And so instead of voting on this tonight, why don't we work this process with all of these elements moving forward to next week? And if we do need more time, we can take it. I don't think anyone wants this to drag on for a long time, and we have important deadlines that the chief has outlined. But rushing tonight on this doesn't seem right.
It's no different.
I'm going to just ask you this question, Lyrian. This resolution is no different than what you've already asked City Law to do. None. Not different at all, except the whole council in this case gets to say yes, and the whole council gets to give specific direction on what that negotiation should look like. That's the only difference. Otherwise, you're just saying, trust me, I've asked them to do this.
The direction is different. This calls for something that doesn't replicate the JPA. What the community has been asking us is, can you replicate the JPA proposal in the form of interlocals? And that's what I have asked Law Department to provide, so that we can compare the differences and the similarities of those two options and approaches.
Would you vote for this if there was an amendment to say exactly that? We want to explore every contingency available in the JPA to be part of this negotiation under discussion.
I just think we've got these as a grouping in a special public hearing. Let's vote on them at the same time.
So you feel that just directing the City Law to do this without really any details, and you're complaining that hers doesn't have any details, but your direction is great, but the whole city council shouldn't be able to vote on giving the same direction.
I'm not asking you to vote on something tonight that I've proposed.
Right,
I'm planning
and
to
I find that
produce-
very revealing,
planning
that
to produce
you're
something.
going to give direction, and that carries more weight than the whole council speaking on the subject.
Well, this is also calling for a resolution for an amendment to the existing interlocal agreement, but we're working on all these other moving
It
parts.
says negotiate.
No, 18R-89, resolution calling for an amendment to the interlocal agreement. I don't think
It has to
we're,
do with SROs.
But-
Yeah.
like I said, I don't think we're ready to move forward on the SROs until we've established exactly what's going to be in the memorandum
I'm
of
just talking
understanding.
about 88 right now, 18R88.
And I was talking about 18R89 because it's my understanding that Lyrian had indicated a delay on these three elements because they're all interrelated to what we're going to be discussing and voting on next week.
Carl.
Thank you. We heard from 20 citizens that came and testified tonight, in addition to others, experts working in the area. And not everybody agreed with absolutely everything, but I think there was agreement on the three big items that we're looking at. We agree on the need for more safety in our schools. How that's done, making sure that everybody is treated equally, everybody's protected, that's a piece of it. Some want more SROs, some want less, some maybe not want any. The need for mental health services, that's something that I think everybody accepts and acknowledges. It's tough in this world. And CLCs, the work that CLCs does in our community, I think is without question. Where we're hung up is this structure. You know, is it best for us to do it by interlocal agreements, or is it best to have this joint agency that can help to manage that and give more direct oversight specifically to the task? Is that more government? Is it costly? I don't know. So we've heard a lot. We've been offered a lot, and in fact, Mr. Seacrest offered us ice cream twice, all 31 flavors. It's 8:30, I'm hungry for ice cream or anything about this time.
With sprinkles, yes.
But I want to get to process. What we're considering now, Councilwoman Gaylor Baird made the recommendation that we delay the first 3 items. The 4th item is also a resolution, so the first 4 items are all resolutions. The last item is an ordinance. And ordinances are treated different because ordinances have another week. And whenever we consider things that are connected, whether it's a development issue, whatever it might be, we always delay our decision until that time of the ordinance, when that's up. Because we get more information. We're considering things that have happened at a hearing like this, important things. And so for us to take that information and to work on it for another week, to make sure that we get it right next week, hopefully, that's what I think we need to do, and I support the motion to delay.
Okay, other discussion?
Well, I'm sorry. Well, I just want to say that it's clear on our agenda that the 4th one is action date on May 7th at the same date as the ordinance. These 3 were resolutions not submitted with the package and not part of that package.
Okay, Jane?
I have nothing further to add because I think we've all had an opportunity, perhaps, Benny, to address this motion.
John?
I'm concerned here, from my colleagues, if you're asking for an interlocal agreement that's going to be done in 1 week when years have been spent coming forward with a proposal for a JPA, I want to, if you're going to do that, and I think Mr. Eskridge hit the nail on the head of looking at the substance. We've got these 3 things, and I don't think there's much disagreement among the body on that. It's the form that seems to be coming out, and if we only have the JPA in front of us, and Mr. Seacrest in his remarks mentioned, well, designed right, interlocal could probably do this, could be do that. So it's not saying that the interlocal is bad. I think there is an overriding concern by a number of people in the public that it's a taxing authority. And then we look at what's the city going to do to replace the parks money and so forth.
We're talking about the delay right now?
Yeah, so anyway, I think having this, especially R88, to get that, and I don't see anything, whether it's from what Ms. Gator Baird's saying or what Ms. Lamb is saying, that can be done in a week. And yet, I mean, if you're willing to say we'll put off the vote, tonight we'll say decisively we won't vote on a JPA resolution or ordinance until we have that opportunity, then I would go for delay. But otherwise, I want it here that we're going to have something put together, done right, and it has to involve the LPS folks, whether it's interlocal or not. And we've been pushed at this JPA saying we've got to have this, and there are alternatives, and it's just designing it. And there are even questions we have about the JPA proposal, whether it's right, and a number of the citizens tonight asked about that. So I'm afraid form is getting ahead of substance, and I want to get on substance and figure out how we can do it the best way. And if we're going to be forced to vote up or down on a JPA, I want to have the equal opportunity to see an interlocal agreement that accomplishes this but does not create another taxing authority that ultimately is going to want more money.
Well,
I support going ahead with these. Okay. I don't think there's anything lost.
Most people have had a chance to talk about the delay. Let me just say this on the delay. It will be very revealing if we get to next week and there's no willingness to delay if we don't have the interlocal agreement complete in front of us and have had time to digest it. If that's what happens, if we get to next week and there's no willingness to delay the vote on the JPA, then I will call everybody who out on it, because that's not right. What's right is we have the same amount of time to look at an interlocal agreement, or at least a reasonable amount of time to look at an interlocal agreement and compare it to the JPA. And if it's not ready, then I expect this body, if we vote to delay this vote tonight, to support delaying the vote on the JPA so we can completely compare apples to apples, not apples to some unknown fruit. Okay, so with that, I'll call the vote on the delay.
I think Benny wanted to
Oh,
speak.
Benny, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I'm sorry to last minute chime in. Could I ask legal a question about, do you need a resolution to draft this? There's been some talk about just an informal request. Was that enough? Do you need more? And the second question, can we separate these out?
Oh, I will separate all these out on the vote.
Okay.
Yes.
If the question is, does legal need a resolution from the entire body to start drafting something, the answer would be no. We quite often draft things at a request of the council person, and sometimes, frankly, they never see the light of day because the council person sees them, gets more feedback, and doesn't introduce them.
So if we were to vote these three down, would you draft it anyway?
If we have a request from somebody on the city council to draft something, we'll draft that.
So have you not been requested to do that yet?
We have been requested to do that, and we've begun drafting it
And when were you requested to do that?
over the weekend.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to take each one of these on the delay individually. And we're talking about the first four, is that correct?
The first three.
First three. Okay, so please call the roll on the first resolution for delay.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
No.
Christensen?
No.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
No.
Motion carried 4-3. Now on the next one.
Yep.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
No.
Christensen?
No.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
No.
Motion carried 4-3. On the final one, Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
No.
Christensen?
No.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
No.
Motion carried 4-3.
Mr. Chair.
Cindy?
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion that the last two items be delayed 30 days. That would be the items having to do with the JPA so that we have time to compare any interlocal that comes forward.
Second.
Moved by Cindy, seconded by John. 30-day delay on 18R78 and 1848.
Correct.
I think we ought to
Discussion?
be specific, do it the first meeting in June, because you've got the Memorial Day off.
I'm sorry, oh, it would be the first meeting, June 6th?
Because Memorial Day is 30 days.
June 6th, 2018.
Okay, discussion?
Okay, that was moved by Lamb and Camp.
Correct.
Did you want additional public hearing in 30 days?
Yes.
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 Thank you.
Okay, Jane?
Just a question for staff?
Which staff?
Probably legal and on the drafting? So Jeff, is a 30-day delay sufficient of enough delay to get the crafting of the interlocal agreement and getting the input of Lincoln Public Schools as well?
Well, we were unable to have it done by the end of the day today because we had to work with LPS. I
Okay.
would anticipate that we can have some sort of a draft ready by the middle of the week.
We're working on it.
We had a pretty good draft drafted today. It's just a matter of working with LPS.
Okay, and if there are, follow up on that question, if there are items that come, after we get that and look at it, there are items other council members would like to see added to it, you'd be willing to work on that as well?
Yeah, we're always willing to draft amendments that
Okay.
council people request.
You're going to draft what Ms. Gaylor Baird has asked you to do, not what the council's asking.
Any council member, whether it's
Said you-
Gaylor
if we ask
Baird
something,
or
that would be an amendment to
Councilwoman
what that's been
Lamb.
proposed.
Well, if we have a draft, any changes to that would have to be an amendment to the
And
draft.
how would we reconcile the draft you're coming up with and the draft the school board is apparently coming up with?
We're going to be working with their attorneys, and I mean, that's something that we're in the process of doing. We've had some conversations with them today, and we will be working with them as, on their end.
So is it certain that LPS board has also requested preparation of interlocal?
That's my understanding, yes.
Yes, it is.
As I mentioned before, Lanny Boswell requested this work of Jim Gesford, the LPS attorney. I requested it of the city attorney. We've coordinated this effort to try and flesh out what an alternative might look like. I thought this was actually going to make people happy, that we would have both written versions to compare and contrast. I think that helps us do a better job.
Makes me very
I think
happy.
that helps us make a more informed decision. It may very well include some of the other things that we're considering, other resolutions, but this is an attempt to build bridges and have a good process that takes into account the input of community voices and concerns of school board members.
Okay, Jane?
It is actually doing the work as opposed to calling for work to be done at a later date, TBD.
When did you talk with the city attorney this weekend?
How many times? Multiple
Several times over the weekend.
You say anything to me yesterday at 3:30 when you called me.
Because I was working with Lanny and we were trying to work out the details before we then contacted the respective members of our board. And I didn't have permission to talk about it and he didn't. We were working together to provide coordinated direction to make this happen in a smooth, clear, coordinated process that addressed the concerns that we both had heard.
I have a question about staff. I wanted to clarify that I know in Cindy's resolution, she was just asking for negotiations on an interlocal that dealt with behavioral health component and the CLCs, but the direction that was given on the interlocal was to deal with the SROs, the behavioral health, mental health component, as well as the CLCs, all three together. Is that correct?
Jeff worked more on Cindy's resolution, so he may have to answer those questions specifically,
Sorry,
but yes.
Jeff. So my question was, the direction that you were given, as well as Lincoln Public Schools, was to deal with the interlocal that would encompass all three components, just like in the JPA, with the SROs, the behavioral health, mental health specialists in the schools, as well as the CLCs. It wasn't just to deal with two elements, it was to deal with all three. Comparable to what the JPA is doing, proposed.
Yes, yes,
The SROs, mental health, CLCs.
yes.
Okay. So in that process, if we're doing an interlocal agreement that does all three of those, why don't we roll in the current SRO interlocal into that?
I don't think we would have a separate one.
Okay.
At the point that if that was the route that we went, it would probably make sense to integrate them at some point.
Right.
Now,
Okay.
when we look at where we're at now, where we have a interlocal for just high schools, I mean, we're proceeding down, could be a different path, but at some point, I think you'd want to bring those together because you'd want to have some uniformity.
I agree.
Although I can't speak for this council or the school board, which could say, no, we've got middle school, we've got high school, we want to approach them differently for whatever policy reasons you might come up with.
Okay. Cindy?
Doesn't the JPA actually reference our interlocal for the purpose of allocating costs and so forth? It references the SRO interlocal?
Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I think we're now looking at a delay. We're looking at right now, that's a proposal in front of the council, a 30-day, well, the first Monday, we're meeting in June, correct?
No less.
That's the delay we're looking at right now. Do you have something to talk about the delay?
Yes, I just wanted to put in a note of caution about delaying for 30 days. As part of the budget revision process that this council enacted last year, the mayor has to release a budget by June 15th. A lot of these things have major impacts on the development of the budget process, so delaying it for 30 days could potentially push back the release of that budget or make substantial changes be altered by this body after the release.
What would be a reasonable delay to be in compliance with all these other elements that are additional moving parts? I have to defer to legal and
I guess it's difficult for us to say exactly how long this is going to take. So we started working on it right away, though. We're going to have a draft here pretty shortly. We're going to be visiting with the LPS attorneys. We're going as fast as we think we can go. From our standpoint, where we're sitting now, we don't know what other kinds of inputs we're going to get from this council or from the LPS board. So for any of us to say, we know it's going to take 2 or 3 weeks to get it done. I can't say that. I know how fast we're going to get a draft done. We're going to get it done here in the next day. How that's going to square up with what LPS is doing, we don't know yet. And
Can't
we
you
won't
take
know
this
till
on a
tomorrow.
week-by-week basis? I mean, you'll know if you have it tomorrow, and then you'll know Monday if you need to delay further.
Yes, my only point would be that we've had quite some time to look at the JPA, and I'd like at least a week for myself to look at another document.
Then
I
if
mean,
you haven't
that's-
had a week, by next Monday, delay it further would be the suggestion.
Okay.
I would suggest maybe we continue the public hearing
Mhm.
on these items
I would
next week,
agree.
and then we can revisit if a delay is necessary.
Okay, so.
If I may, thank you. So Brandon, I did have a question to ask you. That's why I butted in. Thank you very much before he completely left the room. So I know you've talked about the budget process, but for the last several years, evidently, we've been budgeting $600,000 for the CLCs. There's no reason to believe that's not going to be in this next budget, because even if there's a JPA, we're not going to have the funding from the JPA. Isn't that right?
Even if we're not going to have a JPA? I
No,
mean,
if we
there's-
had a JPA, we still wouldn't have the funding. We'd still have to budget in for the CLCs and SROs in this budget period, because the JPA wouldn't have the funding quick enough to do that.
I think if you're saying if there's existing funding available.
Right,
and
it could,
there is
it could be in this,
existing- that is-
it could be in this budget, even with, I mean, it would need to be necessarily even without a JPA, because we're not gonna have any money for the JPA until we're told sometime next year.
Like that was part of the previous year's budget, assuming that would be part of this year's base budget, but we're still going through that process, meeting with the mayor and departments, and they have not yet started that prioritization process. So I think we're still early in the budget development process.
And we finalize the budget in late August, right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
I guess I'd only add, what do we set the levy at? You've just asked me if the mayor's office would guarantee setting a levy that was proposed. We don't know what that levy is without this discussion being over.
Well, I guess if you have placeholders of the 600,000 for the CLCs and 400,000 for the SROs, you've got the 0.5%, the half cent.
I think it is not prudent budgeting to take the levy down without some sort of assurance about what's actually happening on a fairly major proposal.
Well, and I
We wouldn't
understand
go
that.
for that.
I understand that we're talking about the budgeting process, and then at the point, by the time we get to the end of the budgeting process, 60 days or 30 days isn't going to keep us from getting to the end of the budget process and you being
But
able
I don't
to
understand why you
eliminate
would-
those line items.
Okay, but you could take care of this week to week fairly easily.
So,
Well,
am I hearing a commitment from my colleagues that if we're not all comfortable next week to vote on this thing, that we can delay it?
Yes, of course.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. In that case, I'm going to call the roll on the motion to delay these items for 1 month, and I'm going to vote no. Please call the roll.
Raybold?
No.
Schob?
No.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
No.
Eskridge?
No.
Gaylor Baird?
No.
Lamb?
Yes.
Motion lost 2-5. On the second one, Raybold.
Which one were you talking about?
What?
This is,
This-
well, the motion was on both of them, 18R78
Right, okay,
and
so you're talking about the
1848.
delay, okay.
Yep. Delay on 1848. Raybold?
No.
Schob?
No.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
No.
Eskridge?
No.
Gaylor Baird?
No.
Lamb?
Yes.
Motion lost 2-5.
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion that we delay those two items 2 weeks, not 1 week, because we're already into the week. So,
Well, these items will be on for action on the 7th.
and I'm saying go to the 14th.
You want to delay them to the 14th?
Yes,
Okay.
as a compromise here.
Second.
2 weeks, motion by John, seconded by Cindy. Discussion?
And you want continued public hearing, John?
Yes,
Yes,
please.
please.
Very good, thank you. Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
No.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Motion carried 6-1.
Okay. I believe our meeting that we wanted to end by 7 PM is now ready to terminate. I'll entertain a
Chair,
motion.
I would move for adjournment.
It's open mic night.
Oh, excuse me, it's open mic night, sorry, oh my goodness. I forgot. Open mic, please. Anybody wishing to speak on an item that's not on this
Get this party
agenda
started.
or scheduled for a future agenda, please come forward. Oh, thanks. Thanks for saving me.
Justine Petch, Public Policy Specialist with the Lincoln Chamber, 1128 Centennial Mall. I'm here today representing the Growth is Good Coalition, a coalition comprised of the Home Builders Association of Lincoln, the Lincoln Independent Business Association, the Lincoln Chamber of Commerce, and the Realtors Association of Lincoln. We represent issues relating to private business community, fostering the continued growth of Lincoln, and encouraging strong investment and development within our community. Previously, we submitted a letter in response to the city's Emerald Ash Borer Response and Recovery Action Plan. I'm resubmitting this letter to the council, and I want to reiterate our strong encouragement to bid out the process of the ash tree treatment and removal to the private business sector. This would allow the private sector companies to utilize their expertise. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Justine? Thank you very much.
Good evening, and thank you for your time. My name is Sarah Moshman, and I live at 1901 Pepper in Lincoln at 68502. My residential neighborhood is a proud 100-year-old historic district of mostly single-family homes. I'm speaking today because I came home from work a few weeks ago to find that Allo Communications had installed a 6.5-foot tall utility cabinet directly on the curb in our neighborhood. Now, I don't know, can I put this on here and just kind of show? This cabinet looks like an old refrigerator. It just sprouted onto our curb and into our lives, and now we must view it every day. This is worse than having a disrespectful neighbor put a refrigerator on the curb, because Allo is not a neighbor. They're a for-profit company, and the Allo fridge cannot be hauled away. So how does a company just come in and erect a 6.5-foot tall appliance directly on a low-density residential curb? Does Lincoln have no power to require a company to consider the aesthetics of a neighborhood? I looked at the contract between Allo and the city, and in the contract it said that Allo was to follow the municipal codes for rights-of-way. I looked at the municipal codes regarding rights-of-way to find there are no restrictions as to height or size as to what could be placed there. I've lived in Lincoln for over 40 years and was always under the impression that one could not keep large appliances on one's curb or even grow tall vegetation. I thought city ordinances protected neighborhood aesthetics in cases of this sort. So how many other Lincoln residential neighborhoods are now being forced to suffer these appliances? And what will the rules be for future companies now that new precedents are being set by Allo? Because I'm deeply concerned about the apparent lack of restrictions and the threat this poses to our residential neighborhoods, I would like to ask the City Council to consider an agenda item to review the municipal codes and consider appropriate restrictions regarding what can be placed on rights-of-way. One could start at least by designating height restrictions that seem consistent with past practices, such as 4 feet tall. Because there's a convenient alley directly across the street, and I would like to just point that out, it's hard to understand why the city did not require Allo to install it there. Allo, has reasons for not wanting to do so, and I certainly understand business decisions, and I don't claim to know where the cabinet should be placed. But it does seem that decisions should not be based only on the lowest cost, most convenient to Allo locations, especially when for-profit companies start to encroach on residential neighborhoods. Moving the appliance to someone else's curb isn't the answer. They should not be allowed on any low-density residential curb. They belong in alleys or other strategic areas designated for those types of equipment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to use the open mic?
Could we have that referred to David Young, who's, ma'am, do you have some written things that our clerk could refer to David Young, who oversees?
He's talking to you.
Oh, sorry.
Do you have some written things or copies of that we could have referred to David Young, who handles and works with Allo?
I've already been in touch with him. I guess I don't know what you want me to.
So he's aware of your concerns?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's resolve this question here first.
Okay.
Okay?
Do you want to speak to the JPA?
We can't do that now. We've ended that portion. We are going to have testimony on that again.
I'll be here.
In 1 week and 2 weeks.
Can I send you what I would?
Yes, you may, and we encourage you to do so. Thank you. I think we're ready now. Unless someone
Jumping forward, I
Nope.
would move for adjournment.
Second.
Moved by John, seconded by Carl. Please call the roll.
Raybold?
Yes.
Schob?
Yes.
Camp?
Yes.
Christensen?
Yes.
Eskridge?
Yes.
Gaylor Baird?
Yes.
Lamb?
Yes.
Carried 7-0.
Adjourned.